So I want to start this episode by telling a story. It's a baseball story.
Okay.
We love a
gather
baseball
around.
story. So when my grandfather was a younger man, a father, before he was a grandfather, back when he was just a father.
Okay. Was he about the size of an average human father?
Roughly. So he would take his kids, a.k.a. my mother and her siblings,
Okay.
Sure.
to baseball games, specifically in Detroit to watch the Tigers.
Okay.
And my mom told me about one game that they went to where, you know, it was midway through the game, everything was going just fine. All of a sudden, my grandpa starts feeling a pain in his chest.
Oh,
dear.
no. Oh,
Now,
no.
A thing you need to know about my grandpa, he was a nurse. He was a professional nurse. He actually taught nursing at the community college for a while, very dedicated to that pursuit. So he also, being a nurse and being, you know, from a certain generation, felt a certain ownership and control over his body. And so he started feeling this pain in his chest. And again, just watching baseball like you do, Tiger Stadium in the summer. And it started getting worse. Ow, ow.
Oh, no. Ouchies.
He realized that...
Ouchies, my heart. Oh, no. Ow.
Now, you might wonder, okay, you know, did he realize what was going on in this moment?
Right.
The answer is yes. He absolutely knew that he was having a heart attack.
Oh my God. How old was he?
I don't know exactly. Probably like, what, 40s, I would imagine.
Okay.
Josh, if you tell me your grandfather dies at the end of this story.
He does not die at the end of this story.
Okay,
No.
all right.
Well, then when you realize you're having a heart attack,
Yeah.
you would leave the ballpark, right?
Right.
No.
Yeah.
No. Well, it would be rude, I guess.
He wanted to get his 9 innings in.
He wanted to see the Tigers lose.
That's right.
Because that's what they do.
So he got his full 9 innings in, got back in the car with the family, drove all the way back to Grand Rapids.
No, not even
and
Ann Arbor.
Then checked himself into the hospital.
Oh, my God.
Well, he was like, you know what? I need the healthcare professionals that I know and trust personally.
Yes.
Yeah, wow.
That was like when I needed a root canal, and my dad was like, so there's this guy I used to work with. He does not live near here, but we're driving to him because he's the only endodontist in New Mexico that I trust.
Yeah.
I just like imagining that your grandfather got up for the 7th inning stretch and went, can't.
So many possible worlds, but we got this one. So many possible worlds, but we got this one.
Welcome to the Worst of All Possible Worlds, the first and only podcast that cannot participate in the 7th inning stretch. I'm the worst of all possible Joshes.
I'm the worst of all possible AJs.
And I'm the worst of all possible Bryans. And today we are talking about baseball here because, well, I don't really know why. This week, in fact, we've watched something that has nothing to do with baseball. We watched the hit Henry Selick animated live-action hybrid film Monkey Bone, starring Brendan Fraser.
Oh my God, that is so weird because I thought we were watching Money Plane starring Fraser.
No,
Himself, Kelsey Grammer.
we actually have done neither of these things. We have, in fact, watched the movie Moneyball.
Wait,
What?
no, I said Monkey Bone.
Josh,
Monkey
are you
Bone.
telling me that we are not betting on a man fucking an alligator on the Money Plane?
No, nor are we watching a very disconcerting animation.
Yes, a guy's creation comes to life and his vibes are bad.
His
No,
vibes are horny bad.
In fact, we are talking about a very different film, one in which a different creation comes to life. The Oakland Athletics.
Yes,
the baseball
the
team.
fictional creation
That's right.
of the Oakland Athletics.
I really love that even the name of the team is just like, we gave up.
Yeah.
yeah.
It's like, we don't even know what sport it is exactly. We just bought a team. They're the Athletics. I know
These fellas sure know how to run around the base paths.
Yeah.
Don't
they
they,
sure
folks?
do.
And I know that the Athletics actually used to be a good team when they were in
Philly.
Philadelphia.
Yeah.
Which I knew.
Yeah, well, I mean, here's the thing. We're going into this episode, and I feel like, Josh, you know the most about baseball out of everyone here because you have followed baseball for most of your life.
Yeah, I would say to differing amounts of interest. Like when I was growing up, obviously, the sort of like mid 2000s were actually a very good time for Detroit sports if you wanted to watch hockey or basketball.
Right.
Because the Wings and the Pistons were both quite good. But I never got as into baseball professionally because the Tigers were just generally really fucking bad.
Quite bad. And the same thing with like the Lions too. It's just like, oh dear.
Well, and you have to watch the Lions. That's just part of being from Michigan, honestly, is you watch the Lions lose every Thanksgiving.
You gotta wear the sweatshirt on your hit sitcom of the 90s in order to get people to also watch the Lions and be disappointed.
People could like send sweatshirts over to the set of Home Improvement, which is what AJ is referencing. And there is an episode where Tim wears a Calvin College sweatshirt.
Yeah. Oh man, we gotta cover just that episode for this podcast.
I would
no
rather
other episode
not.
of Home Improvement.
3 hours of that.
Of just studying the thread count.
Yeah, we just talk about the shirt the whole time.
Yeah. That's our April Fool's Day next year.
No, but I mean, it's Moneyball, right? We're talking Moneyball. And this is a movie that I think a lot of people have at least heard of.
It was nominated for 6 Academy Awards and won none of them.
I knew it precisely because Bobby Kotick.
Kotick? Kotick. That's Arthur
was
on
in
the
it.
tick. He's the Kotick.
Because when he's your coworker, he really ticks you off.
Hey. Yeah, this guy sucks. And it was just like...
And maybe harasses you, allegedly?
Yeah, and I just remember seeing on the video game websites, they're like, Activision, Blizzard Activision Zone, Bobby Kotick.
Yes.
Bobby Kotick is...
There we go.
Yes.
Is checking your coats in the hit new film Moneyball, which is about baseball, but it's not.
Right.
Yeah, it is kind of what the director of the film, the eventual director of the film, Bennett Miller, describes as an anti-sports movie. That's sort of what he set out to create.
And that's
I
precisely what Saber-metrics is, anti-sports.
Yes, but what I think he's actually ended up doing is just creating a sports movie kind of against his own wishes.
Yeah.
Like, he has actually created a very good sports movie, in my opinion. Our good friend Patrick Willems made a video essay about why baseball is like the most cinematic sport. And it's something that I agree with him. Like, I don't particularly like sports movies for the most part, except when it's baseball. Like, you know, Field of Dreams is also not really a film about baseball.
No, it's about corn.
That's a film about Kevin Cornster standing in a Cornster field.
I don't know.
I don't feel great about it.
Cornstner.
Yeah, Cornstner.
There you go.
Kevin Cornstner.
Don't get it right.
Okay, sorry. But like The Natural, I think is a really wonderful movie.
A movie Josh has never seen, folks. Josh has never seen The Natural.
Yeah, and I think
I have seen Field of Dreams. I have seen The Rookie.
I do really like the tendency to be like, well, baseball films really well. Let's make movies about baseball. But of course, it's Hollywood. It's in California, so they just have to write movies about actual teams that suck super bad.
Well, in fairness, Disney owned the Anaheim Angels.
Well, that's just brutal, man.
Yeah.
Imagine your boss just being like, yeah, we're going to make a movie about how you can't fucking play. You need a fucking, you need Christopher Lloyd, who is dead, to save your ass.
You need divine intervention.
You need the
to
world's
make it to the finals.
most delusional foster child
to win the
and
pennant.
his deadbeat father to get you only through the pennant.
And also, we're gonna make you play Donald Duck at first. Oh no, I'm sorry, that's Moneyball. That's the plot of Moneyball.
Well, look, these are all great examples of baseball movies, but we do want to focus on Moneyball today.
Yes,
because this is an interesting question that you raised, right, AJ? Like, to what extent is Moneyball a true baseball movie? And I think the best way to sort of understand how it came about is to talk a little bit about the sort of production cycle behind it.
Yes.
And all of the different pieces that came together that resulted in this movie.
Because all of that stop motion animation is really, really difficult.
So Moneyball begins its life as a book in 2003, a book called Moneyball, The Art of Winning an Unfair Game by Michael Lewis. And Michael Lewis has this track record of sort of writing nonfiction books that get adapted into movies.
Well, he had a 3-movie streak.
Yes.
He's a financial writer. Of course, we have Moneyball. We have The Blind Side, which is based on just a section of his book.
Right.
And we have The Big Short, which is the one that's actually the one movie that's actually about finance.
Right. And kind of goes out of its way to explain the details of high finance and try to explain why the bubble burst using a lot more, fourth wall breaking stuff in there. Adam McKay really goes out of his way to like talk to you, the listener, and like, this is how this all went down. Moneyball takes a little bit more subtle of an approach. And by that, I mean, they use one of the screenwriters, Aaron Sorkin, to explain it it to you without you necessarily knowing that you're learning what's happening.
Yeah.
Now, a question for either of you. Did you guys read any of the book?
No, I've never read
Okay.
the book. No.
Because
I've never read any book in my life.
famously,
Yes, notoriously.
I read it
Beautiful
last
illiterate.
night, and there are a lot of things about the book. It's a quick read. Style.
It's a quick write.
Yeah.
That's right, Brian.
His turnaround is insane, Mike Lewis.
There's a lot of fun little stylistic things. It also just gets like weirdly racist every once in a while.
You mean like The Blind Side?
I mean, let's put it this way. I would not want to hang out with this man.
He seems like kind of a weird
I
dude.
get a very specific sense of who he is just from his writing. And in the version that I read, which was an ebook that was, I think, the trade paperback, there's an entire postscript where it's basically just him being like, oh, by the way, all of my haters who like didn't like this book, well, they suck. And here's why. And it's like, this is 10 pages I didn't need.
Can you imagine at the end of Moneyball, like Jonah Hill just turning out, looking dead into the camera and saying, and also to all the haters.
That's exactly what the book does.
Oh.
It's very strange.
I mean, that's kind of an Adam McKay move, weirdly. That feels more like a Vice.
Sure,
kind of move.
but and even then, like what Adam McKay started doing, because he was, Mr. Comedy with Will Ferrell guy.
Yeah,
until
Step Brothers and all that.
Until that relationship
Aw.
blew up over Larry Bird of all things.
Yeah, wild.
We'll have to talk about Winning Time on the show
when
at
he
some point.
pivoted
Yeah, sure.
to do The Big Short, he seems to have taken his biggest cue from Steven Soderbergh. It's a very
Right.
Soderbergh-esque thing that's interested
Absolutely.
in process and interested in throwing as many celebrities into tiny, tiny roles as possible to just keep things flowing along.
Yeah, and we'll get to Soderbergh because he also had a hand in Moneyball in a
Aha,
very interesting way. But
It's almost like I set him up while you knock him down.
What? I don't know. Don't worry about it. So Sony buys the rights in 2004, and they hire this guy, Stan
Stan Shera. And then they all went out like him.
Stan Shervin to write the screenplay with David Frankel attached to direct. Stan Shervin also wrote the screenplay, and this is true for the Clifford the Big Red Dog 2020 film. This is a fun fact, does not exist. No one saw this movie.
I mean, it exists.
I don't know. I mean, prove it. Prove that
I
it
can show
exists
you a
to me.
trailer.
Yeah, they filmed like just down the block from here.
Wait, you saw the big red dog walking by your window?
Yeah,
I don't
he's
think
real.
so.
He's
I
real.
don't
The
think
dog
so.
was made out of computers.
I don't. You're telling me there is a film where Clifford the Big Red Dog is a cyber dog?
Yes.
Like from Boston that like walks down the street
I
and
don't
has
know,
a giant
I don't
gun
know how
on
to
his
tell
back.
you this, but like also the original Air Bud died a long time ago.
No,
and they
don't
kept
you say
making
that
those
to me.
movies.
There is nothing in the rule book that says that dog died. Okay, that dog is immortal to me. So Frankel exits the project pretty quickly, and they bring on Steven Soderbergh. for
Yeah,
it.
like Soderbergh was already in production for this little baby.
Yeah.
Like he was doing what Warren Beatty did with Reds, or what Richard Linklater did with Bernie, where he's going out and he's interviewing people. He's talking to Daryl Strawberry and others. I know who Daryl Strawberry is, so I
Let's
said
go
that
Mets, baby.
one. His head got really big.
Yeah, that's the Simpsons. Like that's the thing is that I know most of these athletes from The Simpsons is unfortunately the truth. We are not sports guys.
Oh, I know my fair bit of if you talk to me about like the mid 2000s Cubs, I could tell you some things.
Oh yeah, I mean, I also know a lot about the Padres, the '98 Padres too,
Okay.
because that was our chance
I
to win the
only
World Series, and we got
watched-
obliterated by the '98 Yankees.
I only watched a pod race in 1999.
yeah,
Anakin Skywalker.
It's really fun when I would go to a Padres game. I'd always stand
Yeah.
up in the middle and go, "Now that's Padres."
I'm more of a Ben
Ing.
Quadraneros guy myself, but
I was always rooting for Ben Quadraro, and it's such a no. Not a joke. Like,
Okay, all
because
right.
I was one of those kids who bought like the Star Wars book that explains who Glup Shido is. And
Yeah,
then
of
you
course,
find
of
out that Glup Shido appears for 5 seconds and then trips on his own balls or whatever.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
exactly what happened to Ben. It's like he has 4 pods. on his pod racer.
That shouldn't even be legal.
No. That's too many
They
engines.
made it
That's
legal
what
because
did.
it can't get past the starting line.
It explodes.
This is a Ben Quadranero fucking hate account right now.
Oh God! So Steven Soderbergh.
I had money on that guy.
Yeah, AJ, what about
I
Steven
had money on
Soderbergh?
Steven Soderbergh, and let's find out how that turned out.
You thought he would direct this movie.
I thought he would
Yeah.
direct this movie. I lost so much money.
I was on a Soderbergh set once.
Oh, were you?
Very, very pleasant.
Which
Yeah.
one?
It was Ocean's 8, which he didn't direct.
Right, but
he was
pro-
retired
Yeah,
at that point in
quote
time.
unquote. Yeah,
But he was doing the second. It was the weirdest thing. We were coming back the next day to do second unit because Gary Ross is very loud. You know, he's got his own thing going on. Whatever.
sure.
Was leaving, and we were still at the old TWA terminal before they turned it into a hotel,
Right.
JFK.
Right.
And it was like, oh, it's second unit. And we're just, hanging out. You get some guys on cameras. No one's really even talking. Like, it's just like getting it done, getting shots of extras or whatever that don't end up in the movie.
Right.
And then I'm like, the guy doing second unit, this can't possibly actually be Steven Soderbergh right here. And
Right.
he's just like fiddling with the lens. I'm like, whatever.
That's kind of what he loves to do.
I was going to say,
Exactly.
like, what is, if we had to, for people who aren't familiar with Soderbergh and his whole oeuvre, like, what's
Yeah.
his deal?
His deal is Contagion. Watch Contagion. I think that is like the most distilled sense of Soderbergh and his style. But Soderbergh has done a lot of fucking movies. He's done a lot of great stuff over the years, like The Limey. He's done a bunch of stuff you've never heard of. Like, he
Right.
just
He
keeps
just loves
making
working.
movies. He
Sure.
loves the game. Even when he's retired, he's not retired. But I really could see this working. There's a way that it couldn't work. Like, The Laundromat.
Yeah, and we should sort of clarify like what was happening
Yeah.
behind the scenes here,
Yeah.
because Soderbergh was developing this thing for a while, and this is by the time they got the second screenwriter on board, Steve Zaillian, who you might know for writing the screenplays for Gangs of New York,
Okay.
The Irishman, and Schindler's List.
Wow, that's quite a
That's
resume.
true. He also wrote, in terms of like sports, kind of, he wrote Searching for Bobby Fischer.
Well, and I've read a little bit about what the Soderbergh version of this movie was going to be, and it sounds like it was going to be more like the book, which is to say,
Right.
yes, there is a heavy focus on Billy Beane, the general manager of the A's, and
Just
what his whole deal is.
Very serious man, Billy Beane.
Yes.
But
Billy Bean.
it sounds like it was going to be more focused on like baseball more broadly and how
Yeah.
the approach of Billy Beane as a GM
Yeah.
changed not just the A's but the whole game of baseball. Less of a character study and more of an examination of the game itself.
Right. And so this was going to have real life athletes playing themselves in it. It was going to have more documentary talking head interviews in it. And the big problem here was that about like a week before they were set to film this version of it, Soderbergh starts frantically rewriting the script and adding in all these extra interview parts and adding more baseball statistics.
Good.
And like making it it sounds like my nightmare.
It sounds like my dream.
But no, exactly.
I always love movies about details, personally.
Yeah,
you
no,
know?
but I feel like there are a lot of that actually remains in the movie itself. I don't think this is a movie about baseball. I think this is a movie about numbers, ultimately. But Soderbergh turns in this draft, and the executives at Sony, especially Amy Pascal, look at this draft and go, uh-oh. And 5 days before they're set to start filming, they cancel the movie outright.
Wow, who was producing this? Joaquin Phoenix? He just backed out of a movie a couple days before they were supposed to start to
Oh,
shoot.
okay.
This is
Gotcha.
very, very.
Oh, wasn't that the one? Wasn't
very
that the gay love story he wrote for himself?
Yes,
Huh.
in
Yeah, all right.
Mexico. Yeah,
Very strange.
I'm being timely.
very timely.
Brian's timely references corner.
Yeah, hey.
It's actually timely. It happened right now.
How topical.
Yeah.
Yeah, Soderbergh exits the project, and then but Brad Pitt cannot let this movie go. He wants to play Billy Beane desperately.
Was he attached from the beginning?
He was,
Okay.
which is how they got the funding in the first place.
Got
And
it.
they had spent money at this point already on developing the thing. And so Brad Pitt has dinner with Catherine Keener, who basically tells him, "Hey, you should meet my friend Bennett Miller." Who was mostly known at this point for directing a little film called Capote. And Bennett Miller went to NYU with Philip Seymour Hoffman. They started a theater company together that
The Lab?
no, a different one.
Okay.
that failed very quickly.
The ball.
Basically, they also had a joke between them where if any of them were to ever win an Oscar, that they would spend their entire speech barking like a dog, which obviously did not come to pass because that was not. I would have loved if that was Hoffman's speech.
Yeah, they don't have the sense of commitment that, say, Mark Rylance has whenever he wins an award.
That guy is so fucking committed to the bit.
I'm going to go up and recite another prose poem.
Oh my God.
Yeah, about fishing in the Great Lakes, which then will become a Broadway show at one point.
Yeah.
That is just me doing tone poetry. But Bennett Miller has a very distinct visual style to him, right? It's very cold. It's very objective.
And not just visual, but oral.
Yes.
Right? The sound, there's always a droning sound, which is why I'm going to recommend to everyone listening to this, if you haven't seen Moneyball, don't watch it on Peacock.
Yeah.
Because the sound is compressed to shit.
Yeah, it's
and so
really
there's
compressed.
so much of it is in the treble area, and you always have like sort of a slow strings going, or you have the sound of just air moving or water or whatever, and it all just sounds like MP3 compression, and just it's horrible. It sounds like dog shit.
And I was not as gripped this time watching it on Peacock because there is something all-encompassing about that sound that puts you into the anxiety of Billy Beane himself.
Well, and the first time that I saw Moneyball was in the theater, and it really is a movie that is well suited to that experience.
Yeah, it is extraordinary.
This time around, I grabbed a high-quality 4K rip.
That's
from
what you
Blu-ray,
should do.
so-
That's what you should do. You should just go and pirate this movie because Peacock does not care about quality in their distribution model, I guess.
Yeah, I guess. So they bring on Bennett Miller into this fold, and then Brad Pitt's like, okay, so we just have this new draft that Soderbergh had added all this stuff into. We want to like refine it and put it into a new draft, but we're going to need another screenwriter. So they pull in this little guy named Aaron Sorkin.
Oh, I've heard of him.
Who you may have heard of.
Little
He seems
guy.
Cool. But basically, Sorkin was very trepidatious about taking this gig because he was rewriting a screenwriter that he respected a lot.
Yeah.
So Sorkin calls Zaillian while Zaillian is on vacation with his family in Rome. And this is a quote from him about that encounter. Zaillian says, "I was standing on a side street just around the corner from the Pantheon. He, in this case being Sorkin, was being asked to write some new scenes, and I said, that's better than dismantling the script. Try not to do that if you can. What I remembered most about the conversation was when I asked him what he'd do if I was calling to tell him what he was telling me. Without much hesitation, he said, I'd burn the studio down." And that's sort of what bonded them. Essentially, they were just trading drafts back and forth, just like working on each other's stuff. And it's so funny because the final film feels like the screenplay is at active war with itself.
Yeah.
But it makes it, I find, so gripping and fascinating because there is one screenwriter who thinks Billy Beane is the hero of the story, and there's another screenwriter who thinks that Billy Beane is a fucking villain.
And this might be an interesting time, too, just to sort of pull it back to the book very briefly.
Please.
Because I think that some of those things about Billy Beane being a hero are in the book.
Sure.
When you read the book, I would say that it's pretty fucking clear that Michael Lewis idolizes the guy. He thinks he's unbelievably cool.
Right.
And
a lot of finance guys agree, I think, with that assessment.
And part of it is that Billy Beane, and this carries through to the movie, is a very like traditionally toxic masculine kind of guy.
Right.
He works out, when he's in his feelings, what he does, man, he goes to the weight room and he lifts. And when he can't control
stuff.
When he can't control his emotions anymore, he throws stuff.
Or hits it with a bat.
Much like the producer of Moneyball, Scott Rudin.
Yeah. They also brought Rudin on.
Yeah. And so I think it's very interesting how there is sort of this ideal of masculinity that a lot of men kind of dial into. Mm-hmm. And what's weird about Brad Pitt's portrayal is that, yes, Brad Pitt is a masculine guy, but he also has, I think, some feminine characteristics to him. And he sort of takes the edge off of it in a way that you definitely don't get with Billy Beane, the real guy. The way that it starts is, we get some archival footage of the 2001 AL Divisional Series at Yankee Stadium. And we get these big title cards, right? We see that Johnny Damon and Jason Giambi are on the A's. And we see that the Yankees have a $114 million payroll, whereas the A's have a $39 million payroll, right? So 1/3 of the payroll of the goddamn motherfucking New York Yankees.
Yes. And that's the thing. Like the Yankees, they still have the record, right, for the most World Series won.
Oh, yeah.
And that
It's not even close.
That's the common wisdom. It's like, well, they just are able to buy the best players. They don't necessarily have the best team as a team as far as like cohesion, but they just buy all of the highest performers.
And the truth is more complicated than that.
Yes.
But it definitely is the common perception of the Yankees. And from the very beginning, I think that if you hate the Yankees, which most baseball fans do, you are primed to be interested in what's going on here with the A's. And we cut from this archival footage to this establishing shot of Billy Beane, played by Brad Pitt. He's sitting in the Oakland Coliseum. It's empty. He's just there in one of the seats looking kind of morose. He's holding a pocket radio, I think, and like listening to the game.
There's a lot of shots in this film of just empty stadiums of like Billy Beane isolated, right, from the rest of humanity. And it's just like this man has given his entire life to baseball and it has not given him anything really back. And so he is going to like lead the one-man revolution to bring it the motherfucking down. It's
bring it the motherfucking down.
Yeah. Yeah. He's going to bring it the motherfucking down. I don't know. But it is also interesting that this establishes that from the word go, we see the numbers, right? We see the budget. This movie sets it up as a David versus Goliath story. When we see Brad Pitt in the stands as Billy Beane, he's tiny, right? He's this tiny little guy in this big stadium, and it shows like what he's up against, right? He is going to bring down the New York Yankees, as he should, because they defeated my beloved 98 Padres and made me lose faith in baseball forever.
And they also defeated my beloved 2000 New York Mets. Like, it's
a good villain. Like, it is a good villain that most people will have some association with.
So, like, the first thing that really happens in the narrative then is Giambi gets traded away. Bye-bye. So Brad Pitt goes and hangs out with Bobby Kotick of Activision Blizzard Activision Microsoft.
Yeah, so this is
Sterling Cooper Draper Price.
Strange.
The very real Activision CEO Bobby Kotick here playing Stephen Schott, who was one of the two co-owners of the A's at that time.
Yeah, it's just because Bennett Miller somehow is friends with this guy.
I gotta say though, Kotick is giving a very good performance.
Well, apparently
here.
he wrote some of these lines too. Like he showed him the script, and Bobby was like, "This is not how I would talk in this meeting."
Right.
And he's like, "Well, why don't you just play the role?" And he's like, "Fine, make a Call of Duty movie." And Bennett Miller was like, "Sure, I'll do that."
And he sure didn't.
He was like, "No, I'm gonna make Foxcatcher instead."
Ownership is unwilling to give Billy any more money, basically, to spend on players, because the A's are about to lose team control of Johnny Damon and Jason Giambi, their two biggest stars. They're going to enter free agency. They're not going to have enough money to buy him back. And so this is now Billy's challenge is, you've got to build a contender out of essentially spare parts because you just don't have the money to sign big stars.
You've got an impossible task ahead of you. Make a California baseball team that wins one game.
Just one. Just one. Come on.
This is what's interesting to me about this scene is that, yes, it's economical. It sets up the stakes very quickly.
Yes.
What it doesn't do, though, is cast any doubt on this idea of like, well, why can't he spend more money?
Because he doesn't have it.
Well,
right?
Well, but he does.
I mean, he has 35 million, going up against somebody that has like 120 million to spare.
No,
right?
But what I'm saying is that Steve Schott has more money. He's just choosing not to spend it on the team.
Yeah, he got a lot in the Microsoft merger.
I suppose, but like from Billy's perspective, he's not budging on the money. Like it doesn't necessarily matter because this movie, isn't focused on Schott. Like, that would be a very different sort of story because we are trapped in sort of the Aaron Sorkin mono story that he tells, which is small guy with good ideas up against big machine with bad ideas. Good ideas will win in the end.
And a brilliant
small
genius,
guy, but second biggest guy.
Second biggest. That's right. Exactly. Yes.
And a genius man. To be very clear, man. Like a man of unimpeachable genius who just isn't understood in his time.
We're not about to pretend that Molly's Game didn't happen. No one watched it, but it happened.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
It is about a genius woman.
It is about a genius woman.
It's Aaron Sorkin's directorial debut.
I just wanted to throw that out there because, like, one thing that makes baseball different from all of the other North American professional sports is that there is no salary cap system. There is a luxury tax where if your payroll gets above a certain threshold, you have to basically kick money into the common fund for the other franchises.
Okay.
But it's
for like the MLB on the whole.
Yeah, and again, it basically gets paid into all the other teams. But it's not like, say, the NFL, where you can only spend up to a certain point, and then once you hit that cap, you got to figure out what to do with your roster.
For that money, for that luxury tax that goes back to the MLB, is that before or after counting all the money that goes into your translator's bank account?
Talking about, is this a Shohei Ohtani joke?
Of course it is. Why didn't you react? This was timely. I know why you didn't react. Why didn't you react, Josh?
Because
his translator took all of his money. It's the scandal of the year.
Because Shohei Ohtani's not a general manager or an owner. He's a player.
Oh, I thought we were talking about player.
No, I'm talking about player salaries, but this is paid out by management, right? So if I'm
okay.
So I'm Hal Steinbrenner, right?
Okay.
Right now, in this moment.
You
You got
look
such a
like
cool
him.
hat. And, I'm spending, or even better, I'm fucking Steve Cohen of the New York Mets, right?
Okay.
And I am, staffing up a payroll up to a certain amount. And the threshold depends on like a number of different things. I don't totally understand the system.
Sure.
But because I have
You are
gone
not Mr. Met.
above the luxury tax threshold,
Yeah.
I need to then take a certain amount of my money and I need to kick it back into the common fund.
So this is the manager has to pay out to the ML, not the player.
The owner.
Or the owner has to pay out.
The owner pays
Okay.
out, yes.
Interesting.
And
Okay.
so what this effectively means is that unlike in other professional North American sports, like the NFL, like I said, for instance, where, the reason that in the NFL, you can have a team that is like rebuilding one year and then they're a contender like a year or two later.
Right.
It's because the difference in talent, in raw talent between the absolute top of the field and the absolute bottom is simply not as vast because of the way that they enforce payroll caps.
Okay.
But it's not like that in baseball. There have been multiple attempts to try to make that happen, but it hasn't happened. And a big piece of that is that the players union wants nothing to do with it.
Right.
Because high salaries are very good for their top paid members. They want that.
Because top paid members can get paid as much as, Shohei Ohtani's translator got. In the hundreds of millions, but on a weird, like, deferred basis that I still don't what the hell is going on?
I don't know.
This is why you could be like
Scott Boras.
Yeah,
he'll
you
tell
could be like A-Rod and get in the tens of millions, or you can make like a respectable upper middle class salary.
Yeah, you can make $225,000.
Yeah.
Exactly. This is just a piece that doesn't come into the conversation at all in this movie, and I understand why it doesn't.
Yeah, it's very complicated.
But it's one of those complicated things that I think is really important context.
Yeah.
It's not as if the A's are just like, oh, I'm just a little guy. I can't spend more money. This is a choice that was specifically made by ownership to not put more money into the team. And this is what ended up leading to the demise of the fucking Oakland A's.
And what a good way to depict that story. You get one of the biggest assholes in business, Bobby Kotick.
Yeah.
You get him to play this asshole. Why not just play up the fact that this guy's a fucking villain and also a brick wall that you can't get past?
Which they kind of do, but he mostly directs his anger elsewhere, right? He directs it down.
Toward Art Howe, the manager.
And towards Art Howe, the manager, which is also, I think, a very good depiction of how the flow of power works in these organizations, which is like you don't take it out on what above you, even though that is the problem. You take it out downstream. And we see that because old Billy goes back to his board, who is made up of just a host of really wonderful, like no-name actors.
Fantastic character actors.
I mean, some of these are just real agents.
Yeah.
These are actual guys who work in baseball.
And it's extraordinary. I think they do a really good job in this.
Yeah, this is something that that you'd expect the Safdie brothers to do, but it's not made in the way the Safdie brothers do it. It's not a bunch of short takes and ad libs. I'm assuming there's ad libbing here, but
probably a little.
It's still very. There's long takes here, and it's very stately and it's very still. And I love that they're talking about this table of guys. This is the thing about sports that makes it kind of interesting. Is like these are all guys with like lots and lots of money, moving lots and lots of money, making big decisions in this big, glitzy, glamorous sport. and they're
not so glitzy and glamorous in the case of the A's.
No. But I mean, it's still a big sport with huge lights and $200,000 cameras filming everything.
The show. Yeah.
And they're in just this fluorescent fucking brick room somewhere in the middle of the stadium.
Which again, like this,
that's real.
This is one of the very cool things that I like about what this movie does, which is that it uses real locations to emphasize the gap between teams that are willing to spend and teams that are not.
Yes.
When we see the interiors of the Oakland Coliseum, those are shots of the Oakland Coliseum, which is famously the shittiest venue in all of North American professional sports.
Yeah, it's not great. And I think it's very interesting that it is all these agents talking about like who they want to draft, but it's not really based on anything besides vibes.
Right.
It's like, yeah, that guy's dating a hot girl, so like he's going to be too distracted to like actually focus on the game. And I'm like, well, that's just it's like divining wizardry.
It's looks, it's star power, which like that does matter even on just like an accounting level, because if someone's like hot, people will pay to see them play.
Absolutely.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
They look good in those pants.
Yeah,
it took us.
A-Rod, he's a sex symbol to himself.
Come on.
You ever see that photo shoot of him like making out with a mirror?
Oh, God. Hold on. I got to look this up.
That's like the one thing I ever think of. I think it's actually filmed. It's like,
folks, we're going to link this in the comments. This is or
I'm
in the
so
show
glad
notes.
I got
rather.
to introduce this to
This
you.
is horrible.
Oh my God. Who allowed this?
Wow.
Oh, man.
But yes,
You allowed this, America.
So this scene with the old guys is really doing a few different things mechanically. First of all, it's showing us what Billy's primary opposition is by defining them, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And it's a little bit of a caricature, but this is pulled, again, pretty straight up from the book. All of this stuff about like, could they sell you a pair of jeans?
Yeah. There was a point about a guy having an ugly girlfriend, and they're like, that means he probably has bad eyesight.
And that's straight up out of the book, too. Like, this is real.
Yeah.
There are a lot of pieces of just stupid built-in bias that have nothing to do with the actual quality of a given player.
Right.
But what it's also doing is it's being like, well, somebody's got to show these guys who's boss.
Yeah.
And so we get this interaction.
The problem we're trying to solve is that there are rich teams and there are poor teams. Then there's 50 feet of crap. And then there's us.
Get him, Billy.
It's an unfair game. And now we've been gutted, like organ donors for the rich. Boston's taking our kidneys, Yankees taking our heart, and you guys are sitting around talking the same old good body nonsense like we're selling jeans. Like we're looking for Fabio. We got to think differently. We are the last dog at the bowl. You see what happens to the runt of the litter? He dies.
Billy, that's a very touching story and everything, but I think we're all very much aware of what we're facing here. You have a lot of experience and wisdom in this room. Now, you need to have a little bit of faith and let us do the job of replacing Giambi.
Is there another first baseman like Giambi?
No, not really.
No.
And if there was, could we afford him?
Nope.
Then what the fuck are you talking about, man? If we try to play like the Yankees in here, we will lose to the Yankees out there.
This is a scene that Aaron Sorkin wrote.
Yeah, clearly.
This is the guy with more brain talking to the people who are universally wrong about everything always.
Right. And also there's just a fun little idiosyncrasy with his writing where it's actually a little bit Adventures in Odyssey, because there is actually a little something very conservative about the way that Aaron writes, in that at least that all good entertainment was from a very specific era, and everything since then is not classy or does not hold a candle to it. So he's making a reference to Fabio here. In the year of our Lord, in the universe, 2003.
Yeah.
And even by that point, that's a pretty dated reference.
A little washed up, right? He's the king of like the romance paperback in the 90s. Yeah. But certainly a reference that everyone would still know.
Except for the old guy in the room who said, "Who's Fabio?"
He was the man with long hair.
He actually says, "Who's Fabio?"
Oh, who's Fabio? Yeah, that's true. But the other thing is too that like you can hear it in the scene too, especially if you are listening to our podcast, like some people do at 1.5 speed. That last scene might have sounded like a normal Aaron Sorkin thing, but it is delivered very slowly.
Yeah.
And in my brain, having done an Aaron Sorkin project and have watched a lot of Aaron Sorkin stuff, my whole brain is just like, just talk faster. Yeah. Just talk faster. But this thing does not come alive unless it goes at a certain speed.
But what makes this work is because of the sense of space that Bennett Miller has.
Yes.
Right.
He counted on it a little bit too much for Foxcatcher. That movie kind of starts to just sort of feel empty after a while.
Yeah, very hollow.
But here you feel the room that you're in. You get the simulation of the fluorescent light. Everything's kind of green and thin, and yet
the color of the A's and money.
You know, Sorkin's dialogue has to move fast, usually because it's wordier than this.
Right.
A Sorkin character, when they're giving someone the what for, is going to have a bunch of citations, right?
Yeah.
Take, for instance, the famous opening of the newsroom thing, America's not the greatest country. He's like, well, you look at this. We're number this in education. We're number this in blah, blah, blah. We're number this in industry.
The fucking scene where Martin Sheen dresses down that Christian lady and is like talking about all the things that she believes or whatever.
Oh, yeah. He goes through
every
every Bible verse.
That's what it is. Yeah. He cites Bible verses at her.
Yeah. Again, very Adventures in Odyssey coded. I think Aaron could write a very good episode of Adventures in Odyssey.
Well, and you know, this movie doesn't deal in citations, but what it does deal in is flashbacks.
A lot of flashbacks.
I guess it's not dissimilar in terms of its effect, where it's like showing you additional context, right?
Like the most important thing for this movie is that Barry Bean is the most, to his friends, he's Barry.
Got it.
Is that Mr. Bean has just a long history of abject failure.
Yes.
He made the wrong, he apparently had a choice of multiple paths he could have gone athletically. He goes to professional baseball immediately out of high school. He is currently divorced. He's sad. He's angry.
Yeah.
He's got nothing going for him. He sucks.
And I think, you know, again, this is something where the movie takes a little bit of a liberty, but it's still mostly true, you know?
Sure.
Billy Bean got offered by the Mets in high school. He also had an offer on the table from Stanford to do a dual baseball football scholarship. He could have been the QB of the Stanford Cardinal after John Elway.
Whoa.
And instead,
weird.
He decided to take the offer from the Mets, and he ended up doing low A ball for a while and eventually made it up to triple A. Did end up playing like 6 games for the Mets. But like, you know, not a very good career. He ended up then moving over to the Twins, and he had a bit more success with the Twins, but he was never an everyday player. His most successful season with the Twins in 1986, which was the year that the Mets won the World Series. He played he played 80
Padres
games.
haven't yet,
so half the season.
Yeah.
For the Twins. His slash line was 213, 258, 295, which is not great.
Okay. I mean, the other thing, too, is that I think is very interesting about that is that the Minnesota Twins would later be his undoing at the end of this movie.
I know.
Is very, it's kind of cool.
And they didn't lean into it in the movie. And they felt like a missed opportunity.
That is kind of a missed opportunity.
Yeah. Well, and they didn't even talk about the fact that they were being managed by a child.
Is there a movie where a child manages the Minnesota Twins?
Little Big League. He's on the, or is he the manager or is he a player? I think there's another movie where there's a kid who's a manager of a baseball team, and I might be getting them mixed up.
I really like.
No, he's the manager. Yes, Billy,
he's Mr. Manager.
Billy Bean. Suddenly becomes the heir. He's 12 years old to the Minnesota Twins baseball team. It's a dream come true.
That's so funny
for the baseball fan who believes he can get the Twins out of their current slump by managing them personally. Sometimes the players like help him out with his homework. I saw this movie multiple times as a kid.
That sounds really bad.
That is a 6.2 on IMDb, which is just fine.
I mean, that was a whole type of movie. Was like kid can run things better than you can. I mean, Blank Check certainly falls into that category.
Miss that genre.
Mr. Macintosh himself.
I mean, the thing about that genre is that mostly the kids end up like dating full adult women, and you're like, no.
The director
in real life sometimes too.
The director of Little Big League also produced A Few Good Men.
Oh,
Sorkin!
My God. It's all connected.
You just draw this big web and you're like, it all connects to this one big sign on a hill. No one knows this. It's called Hollywood.
Oh, more like Holly Weird.
But anyway, all of the like additional facts here about Billy Bean. I mean, I find it just interesting as a Mets fan because like he has a very deep, long-standing connection to the Mets. And in fact, when Sandy Alderson, who by the way, hired Billy Beane to lead the A's, went then to the Mets, and when the Mets were looking for a new GM, there was stuff thrown around for a little while that Billy Beane might actually take over for the Mets. Can I get my Mets shit out right now? Is that okay?
Why do you think I chose this movie?
Right.
That was the whole purpose of this.
So,
besides the fact that I love Moneyball.
I mean, there's a few things that I like about the Mets.
Who do you think is behind the Mr. Met?
I think the biggest one is Mrs. Met, actually.
Who do you think is in Mrs. Met's uniform?
Mrs. Met.
So you just think that you takes off the head and there's just another head underneath it?
Do you think most people just take their head off?
She can't take her head off. That she's just there. She can take her clothes off.
You started this.
And maybe
that has described
should.
Several Google searches.
And maybe she should. I don't know. I'm not saying it one way or the other. I'm just saying that
Step on me,
Mrs. Met is real.
And she is my wife.
No, she's Mr. Met's wife. I don't know if that would stop me. It just depends on the scenario.
Would you put Mr. Met in the cuck chair is my question.
Oh, no.
Would you make him watch?
No, I don't want him in the room.
Okay, you don't want him knowing.
Oh, no, he can know. Later.
Do you need him to know?
Later.
Okay, later after the fact.
Let's go back to Billy Beane, shall we?
Let's do it.
Because I'm sorry, whenever I think of Mrs. Met, I just get all hot and bothered.
Himself.
Yeah.
So many names that start with B. You guys don't even know.
After that flashback, we are now firmly back in the world of Billy. And the thing that is establishing dramatically is that he's trying to outrun his past.
Yes.
And the only way that he can do this is by being the best GM, I guess.
The best goddamn manager you ever see.
He just needs to succeed at literally one thing.
Yes.
And so he goes to Cleveland to try to negotiate a trade.
First mistake. No one has ever succeeded in Cleveland.
Also really wild to just see Chief Wahoo again.
Yeah, just like, whoa.
I had forgotten about him.
Oh, very racist. We allowed that for a long time.
Anyway, he shows up to Cleveland, and Jonah Hill is in the corner of the room where they're doing the negotiation, right?
Yes.
And he seems, even though he's just this little kid, and this is a very young Jonah Hill here, he seems to be evaluating every proposal, right?
Yeah.
And he's like whispering things over to a guy who then is giving signals to Cleveland's GM about should they take the deal or not. Yeah. And Billy's got a deal in hand, and this kid effectively ends up spiking it.
Right. And this was a weird thing to see Jonah Hill at this time in this particular kind of role. He had mostly just done Judd Apatow comedies up until that point.
He hadn't done Wolf of Wall Street yet at this point. No.
Yeah, this is him firmly establishing himself as a dramatic actor.
Yeah. And he's very good in this movie.
He's tremendous in this movie. I love the shot of him after the meeting where he just kind of looks like a Pikmin behind like all the cubicle walls. Like you just see from his nose up like a regular Wilson. And he's confronted by Brad Pitt in, I think, one of the most sharply written scenes in the whole thing.
This was one that I wanted to clip, but it just was too long.
It's long.
It's the silence that really sells it, because it's another thing that feels like it could have been a Sorkin scene in the usual sense, where it's a lot of back and forth, a lot of back and forth. And instead, Jonah Hill says almost nothing.
Yeah, he just says, I'm Peter Brand.
Because he's like, this guy is gonna kill me?
It really seems like at any moment Brad Pitt will just like
well, and Brad Pitt can be a scary motherfucker, and he's really, really doing it here.
Yeah. This is such an effective scene. He's like, who are you? Like, why are people listening to you, you child?
Yeah.
And he's like, I studied economics in Yale. And he's like, what the fuck does that mean? Whose nephew are you? Like, how did you get this job? And it's just because he is looking at the sport in a completely new and different way, which is to say, you are all doing this wrong.
Not even in a new way, but in a way that wasn't being done in the professional world.
Correct.
It was being done by the fans. And this guy is in the movie named Peter Brand, that Jonah Hill is playing. In real life, this guy's name is Paul DePodesta.
Right.
He did not want his name or likeness used in the movie. Also, Dimitri Martin was originally going to play him, and I guess Dimitri Martin looks a little bit more. I didn't look up what Paul DePodesta looks like.
Okay.
Right.
Well, I went and again, there's a bit more about DePodesta in the book, not a whole lot. I also went and watched some clips of him. I would say that the character of Peter Brand is a composite, actually, of a few different guys.
Sure.
And then a very specific character choice that Jonah Hill made. that actually bears very little resemblance to the real life Paul DePodesta.
Yeah,
right.
Namely, Paul DePodesta went to Harvard. But also Jonah Hill here is very diffident.
He's timid. He's a very timid person. He's never really, he is sold here as a guy who works in cubicles and he knows stuff, but he doesn't make executive decisions and he doesn't make difficult decisions.
Which is
he's the numbers guy.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is, again, not really exactly how it was.
No.
But like, there are a few things that they condense here for the sake of dramatic concision. Like, Billy Beane had been doing Moneyball for years before 2003. He was doing it from the moment he got hired by Sandy back in 1997.
Okay.
So
DePodesta was just someone who did it better?
yeah, I mean, and he was his assistant for a while and he helped him out.
Okay.
Yeah, but,
Okay.
Yeah.
I think there's one very funny character detail about Peter Brand, which is at one point we go to his apartment, we see him in his apartment, and there's just a giant poster with Play-Doh on it. Like it's like this, like the philosopher Play-Doh. Mm-hmm. There's no other decoration in the room. There's just this poster of Play-Doh, and I'm like, yeah, that feels like a postgraduate room. Like that. I'm completely sold on this. And in a certain way, he is selling a kind of shadow in a cave. You know, he is selling an illusion, I think. Because I don't know how effective Moneyball is as a philosophy.
Well,
because this movie tells you.
I mean,
it works.
I mean, kind of, but it also seems like maybe the A's just got extraordinarily lucky.
Well, and that's the thing is like you're walking into the room now and you're making this pitch and you've got this guy over here who's like, look, I have found all these people who are cheap players, but they get on base very frequently.
Right.
Where all the other agents are saying, well, okay, but like, what's the circumstances of those guys getting on base?
Right.
They're not just worried about looks. That's something that we got from the earlier scene, but they're like, baseball is a game that is played by people. You can't just look at like this handful of numbers. And of course, it's more than just the on base. They just emphasize on base for the movie.
Right.
And
you can't just look at that because sometimes it's walks. It's like, how can you guarantee that the pitcher is going to walk this guy who doesn't even hit particularly well? Like, you know, why would you do this? Yeah.
Right. Well, and the stats themselves are imperfect representations of what's actually going on the field.
Right.
And this is something where the book goes into a lot more depth about like the different ways that you can measure stats and companies that created stats that have nothing to do with the stats that you traditionally associate with baseball at all.
Right.
But the way that we see this in the movie, again, because they just want to kind of make it easily accessible, is that we get this interaction here where Peter is basically telling Billy the results of his findings.
Billy, of the 20,000 notable players for us to consider, I believe that there is a championship team of 25 people that we could afford because everyone else in baseball undervalues them. Like an island of misfit toys. Billy, this is Chad Bradford. He's a relief pitcher. He is one of the most undervalued players in baseball. His defect is that he throws funny. Nobody in the big leagues cares about him because he looks funny. This guy could be not just the best pitcher in our bullpen, but one of the most effective relief pitchers in all of baseball. This guy should cost $3 million a year. We can get him for $237,000.
That's Sorkin dialogue right there.
Yeah, 100%. And again, it comes back to the numbers, right?
Yeah.
3 million versus 225,000.
Yeah.
And this is where the evils of Moneyball start kind of rearing their heads a little because this is presented as a triumphant moment.
Right.
Right. We're going to build this amazing team and beat those capitalist fat cats by doing capitalism worse than them.
Right.
Because we are going to underpay the shit out of all of these players.
And thus deliver a bigger profit back to the shareholders, to ownership. Yeah.
Right.
To me, when this part happens, particularly with the way that this is presented with the music and the juxtaposition with the visuals, because he's clicking through pictures and stat lines.
And you're seeing the guy pitch, for example.
You're expected to have this very big, I think, emotional reaction to it.
Really generic,
it's supposed
inspirational
to feel
movie
cathartic,
moment.
I think.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that might be the intention. That's never what I've felt watching.
It's not what I feel at all.
I want it to feel more like a Wall Street movie. I want it to feel like look at how just fucking badass we are making deals left and right, as opposed to like, this is hope. This is the thing that's bringing us forward.
This is gonna save baseball.
Today, in the city of Bethlehem, is born a savior, and he costs only $225,000.
But that's the thing too. Like in the build up to it, you buy into it, I think, a little bit more because it's like the island of misfit toys. These are players that are not being bid on, that are not a lot of them not really playing anymore.
Right. They've got a bunch of actual damaged goods. They have people with nerve damage and like people whose game has to change. Right. Some Chris Pratt playing this catcher who can't throw back to the pitcher's mound every single pitch anymore.
Right. Because his elbow is completely gone.
He could potentially play as a first baseman.
Right. That's the thing. Like, that's great. You give these people jobs in their field. I mean, I think that's wonderful. The problem is that they know that they're worth more and they're actively underpaying them. And that it's bad. It's like,
I guess from the perspective of what's happening here, though, these are people who are going to be getting paid that much basically either way, right? If they're getting paid at all.
If they're getting paid at all.
Yeah.
And
that's
they're not going to be utilized as in the role that they could be, which is first baseman or relief pitcher. They're going to be
ultimately better for these guys to be playing than for them to not be playing. But you also would hope that they'd be fairly compensated for their talent.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. And that's sort of the main sticking point that the movie can never really get over.
Right.
I think.
Well, which goes hand in hand with its unwillingness to criticize ownership.
Right.
Those are two sides of the same coin.
You know what it kind of feels like when there's a cop movie, but they can't ever like criticize like the police themselves because then they won't get like, or like in Marvel with the army, right? Where they can't fully.
I'll take your word for it.
Yeah. Marvel has a deal with the army where they can like use
the
their
US
jets.
Army.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's always like, if in a cop movie, it's always becomes a jurisdictional thing where it's like, oh, those goddamn state police really get in the way of our good municipal boys or whatever.
Exactly. And then in Moneyball, it's like you can't criticize ownership because you need to film in their stadiums.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the thing that I think holds the movie back from doing what it actually wants to do, because this movie is actually very against ownership, or like very against like the way that baseball is run, but it will never indict the actual problem.
Instead, it becomes about the agents. And it's the agents who have their way of doing things. They're the good boys club. They sort of become the bureaucrats of the system, the middle managers who get in the way of everything. And it's interesting because they're getting in the way of becoming just more bean countery than they've ever been in the past.
Exactly. And one of those exact people is actually not an agent in the sense of like a talent scout, but he is an agent of the team.
Yes.
The team's manager. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with baseball, it is kind of confusing. You have something called the general manager.
Yes.
And the general manager in this movie is Billy Beane. He's the guy who's doing all of the personnel decisions, the day-to-day, who stays, who goes, who gets traded, whatever. The manager, on the other hand, just straight up manager, they are what in most other sports it would be called the head coach. They're the ones who are down there on the field with the players. They suit up just like all the other players. They get a number and everything. Yeah. And
that's Phil Hoffman in this movie.
That's Phil Hoffman.
Yeah.
He's playing
so good.
The Oakland A's manager, Art Howe. Yeah. And in this movie, he's portrayed as a real fucking stick in the mud.
Yeah, he's portrayed as a guy who kind of doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
Which is also like Billy Beane's problem, is that he doesn't do anything. He's never getting involved.
And that's the arc that Billy Beane goes on in this, is basically, how can I take this manager's job away from him?
Yeah.
Because in terms of, again, going back to like the way that baseball traditionally worked, the GM and the manager had pretty much separate spheres of influence.
Sure.
Everything to do with staffing up the team and, sending people up, sending them down, stuff like that. That was all to do with the general manager. But day to day, like who's on the lineup card, who's playing where, when do the pitchers come in, come out, all of that, exclusively the domain of the manager.
Yeah, and for all 12 of our theater listeners, this is the difference between an artistic director and a director of an individual production inside that organization.
Or even like a production manager and a stage manager.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I mean, just, We're talking about Dusty Baker here.
Yeah.
We're talking about him and his toothpicks.
Talking about
standing
Tony
at first base.
Sparky Anderson.
Yeah.
Tony La Russa. It's guys like that.
They're always
It's
guys with very whimsical names.
Yes, and they are the grumpiest men you've
Yes,
ever
they
seen.
are.
They're always in
I
the
love them.
sports coat. They have their hands in their pockets. They got the ball caps on, and they have never looked more miserable to be anywhere in their lives.
And
Like,
Hoffman
this is their
sells
dream,
it so
man.
well. I swear to
my
God,
God.
Hoffman
He's so
somehow
good.
was able to just will his skin to look worse for this movie.
I forgot Phil Hoffman was in this movie because again I watched it when it came out, so that
It's
was
not a huge role.
It's not a flashy role at
No.
all.
I almost started crying when he showed up just
Yeah.
because every single fucking time he's in anything, it makes the thing better by an order of magnitude.
Oh, infinitely. And again, in lesser hands, this would just be a very stock, I'm going to get in the way of you.
Right.
But you see this man have this entire inner life and this entire inner story that goes completely against Billy Beans. And you're like, I kind of feel like I should be rooting for Phil Hoffman
And that's
here.
what's strange is because the script wants you to be rooting for Billy so very badly.
Oh, yeah.
But in all of these interactions, I think as a viewer, you tend to come out on Art's side of things.
Well, that's
Right.
the thing is like they're saying the whole thesis of Moneyball is the numbers are the most important thing. And all the sticks in the mud that want to get in the way of real baseball are the ones saying, no, it's about people. So you have all these guys who are making the most human argument into the villains.
It's so weird. And
Which is the same thing the book does, by the way. This is something that is identical
Because
to
it's
the
written
book's
by
framing.
a finance guy.
Exactly. And I think that Bennett Miller, I think this is what he means by making it into an anti-sports movie. Because what do sports movies do? They make it about the people.
Yeah.
They make it about the people going up against like these enormous odds.
Yeah, it's about Leslie Nielsen suiting up and being the umpire at the end of the Naked Gun.
So we get to a point now where basically Billy flies back from the from his meeting with the Cleveland Indians, and he gets drunk. He gets rip-roaring drunk, and drunk dials Jonah Hill's character, basically like, how would you have placed me in the draft pick? And he's like, you would have been first pick. He's like, don't bullshit me. And Jonah Hill says, I would have made you ninth. And this is enough to get, Billy to be like, yeah, I just bought you, I guess.
Again,
pack
like,
your bags.
There's moments like this where I'm like, this didn't need to be like this emotional thing. Like, I understand the arc that they're trying to set up for Billy and why.
Yeah.
But there's no need for this to be like an emotionally like, oh, I'm all in my feelings. I don't know. It just didn't.
Well, he's not in his feelings. And I think that's actually one of the things that the movie is dealing with a lot, is that Billy will absolutely like refuse to engage with his feelings if it's not just unadulterated rage.
Yeah.
Like
which also is apparently true of the real guy. Like this is a very accurate portrayal from what I've heard.
What if he just knew it was just a game? Maybe someone should tell him.
Damn. That really makes you think.
Yeah.
This movie makes the stakes of this, which ultimately, as Brad Pitt points out later, it doesn't really mean anything, right? In the grand scheme of things, this is just a game, but it makes the stakes feel like it's the end of the world. And I love media that's able to do that, to take things that feel very small stakes and make them the greatest stakes in the history of time. And I think a lot of that has to do with the soundtrack of this movie. A lot of it has to do with the writing of this movie. And a lot of it is actually laid at the feet of Bennett Miller as the director.
The other thing I think that like they try to use to, I guess, raise the stakes or personalize the story is they bring in the character of Billy's daughter.
Yes.
She's like 12 or something.
Singing an anachronistic song from 2008.
Yeah.
I feel like that's kind of a Sorkin thing. Like he
apparently it's a directorial thing because she auditioned with it. And he's like, I just like that song so much.
Oh, okay.
Basically, he takes her out to go guitar shopping because he knows that the kid likes music.
Yeah.
And, she sings this song about, I'm just a kid and I'm growing up, whatever. This did nothing for me, but I know that AJ, you had some thoughts about this.
Yeah, I think it's very important that we see Billy. If we are building a movie where Billy Bean is the protagonist, I think it is important to see him in a context that is not work. I think it is important to see him in a place where he is actually happy because he can't engage with her there either.
Right.
Because his mind is still back on the baseball field.
Right.
It's also kind of their only connection to Oakland to be like, once we get towards the end, we have to see someone who cares about the team just as a fan of the team.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the daughter ends up being that later on too.
I will concede that it is a little bit hokey, but I think in a film as dour as this one, it is a nice source of like light, for example. Like most of this is shot in fluorescence and everything is like really green.
Yeah.
This is the only one that's shot in like bright like yellows. All the scenes,
his beautiful home. Yeah.
All the scenes with his daughter are shot in these vibrant hues. I don't know. I find them very charming. I find that Brad Pitt's interaction with this kid, I think he's got good chemistry with the kid, and I think that you see like the light sort of return to his eyes, but he quickly has to tamper it out because the daughter's the only one that can see through him. Yeah. And I think this is a thing that like comes up in a lot of Aaron Sorkin's work because Aaron has a daughter.
Yeah.
This is him expressing all of his feelings that I think he wishes he could with his kid because he is also somebody who has a hard time balancing those two areas of his life.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think for me, the issue is just that, like, I agree with everything that you say in theory.
Sure.
And I would agree wholeheartedly if the scenes landed for me, but they just don't. I think that they exist at a weird disjunct to the rest of the movie for me, where all of a sudden we are in such a different tone and we're so quickly wanting to be like very, very sentimental in a way that the rest of the script just is not.
It's very not sentimental, this film.
I just don't like movies whenever they're talking about feelings or whatever. That's chick stuff.
It's a baseball movie.
Yeah. That's right.
To be fair, this is mostly dudes, this film, and all very normal dudes at that.
I will say this. It was fun to see Spike Jonze show up.
Yeah, wild. Why? Sure.
At least that, like, okay, you're friends with another director.
Yeah.
It's not the head of Activision who's never been touched a movie before.
Yeah, it is. And, I that's a very interesting scene, too, because Robin Wright is here as well, very briefly as Billy's ex.
Yeah, Billy's ex-wife, who is also, of course, the mother of their child.
And they have a conversation that it sounds like one of the screenwriters must have had at some point with their ex about raising their kid.
Maybe that was a man named Aaron.
Look, allegedly.
Yeah.
It's such a dressing down of the guy, and the whole time you're just like, this guy is trying to be so nice to Billy Bean and be like, listen, I don't want to overstep my bounds, but like we're all in this together.
Right.
And Billy Bean's like, fuck you, she's my daughter.
But it's also like, honestly, like the guy kind of sucks. Like I like what they do with the costuming.
I like his movies.
I like
he's not actually Spike Jonze.
I like that
you don't know that.
I like that they dress Spike Jonze's character up in this just like horrible, like the set dressing, all of it is just the most like awful new money bullshit where it's like, you really want me to know that you spent $1,200 on those clothes.
He's like, ooh, I just got really rich directing a Fat Boy Slim video.
And it's also, it's just another
With
example.
Christopher Walken, by the way.
But it is one of those things where it's like, it's another part of his life that he has failed at, right?
Yeah.
He can't even keep like this new family that he's made, with Spike Jonze, I guess, in there too, and keep that whirring and keep that happy. And I think that's, again, the importance of the daughter scene is that we see him at a thing that he's good at, that he has not failed at yet, but may if he will not open up to her.
Well, will Billy succeed in his ambitions to make the A's a true contender? Will he succeed in getting his daughter to love him more? Will I succeed in whatever you're about to hear? I will find out. I don't know. Here we go.
Don't fucking move and don't say a word. Okay, that's good. Just stay there. Keep facing the way you're facing and listen very carefully. You're not in danger. I promise. I know this sounds insane, but I need you to watch something. I don't know you, you don't know me, but I need to show someone, and you're the first person who walked by. So, I got a WhatsApp from a number with a 215 area code, opened it up like a fucking idiot. Video attached, played it like a fucking idiot. So this is like an overhead angle looking down, and you can see in the bottom of the frame is a big, long, furry green something. If you don't know what you're looking at, I get it. I wasn't sure what it was at first either, and then I recognized it. It's his snout. And that thing comes out of it. That long, red, prehensile tongue pops out like a fucking New Year's Eve noisemaker, and the camera pans up, and you see...
Oh, you missed me, didn't you?
You see her.
Come here.
And then he takes off her pants and her number 00 jersey, same number as mine, and everything else. And then that tongue comes back out, and he's... That's her ass. He knuckles down on it, gets a real good hold. On our honeymoon, I busted on her 4 times in one night, called it a 4-seamer. Why am I telling you this? WhatsApp message from a Philadelphia phone number. I should have known. I shouldn't have even looked, fucking bitch, but maybe I needed to know. Maybe this is the way that I realize I haven't been the husband I've needed to be, and I haven't been able to fulfill her the way I should, and... I knew it was a bad idea to make her close down her Twitter account. We'll just run the couple's account. I just wanted to stay on brand for the sake of the job. Like she still could keep her locked account and everything. I didn't even mind when she flirted with Keith Hernandez. I mean, come on, it's Keith! I flirted with the guy myself. So many memories. 81 home games a year, every year since 1964. From Shea Stadium to Citi Field. Hell, we just went to London together. Staff smiles when you walk in. Kids love watching you dance. The moms love the t-shirt cannon. The dads love checking out your wife's ass. You look at her. She looks back at you, and you see the whole world in those beautiful black eyes. And the crowd, they loved us back. Ask the Sporting News, USA Today, Esquire, Newsday, The Post, The Times. The only time we didn't end up on top of the list is when it was that fucking vile green pervert who... And you know what? I've never told anyone this before, but fuck it. I've told you everything else. Cincinnati, 1973, Game 2 of the NLCS. We'd just beaten the pants off the Reds, 5-0, and Rosie asked me if I'd like to come back to the locker room and take her pants off too. I told my wife I just needed to go check on a few things, that I'd see her back at the hotel. And I went to the locker room, and Rosie was waiting for me. And I looked her up and down, and I felt my whole body go flush. And something in me turned me around and walked right back out of that locker room because I realized something in my heart of hearts. I couldn't do it. I couldn't do that to my wife. She's my missus. Fuck! You ever see a grown man with a baseball for a head break down and cry? You know what? Go ahead. Turn around, take a good look. I'm Mr. Met, and the Philly fanatic is fucking my wife.
The thing about talent scouts, baseball scouts, and the book talks quite a bit more about this, is that they have a really fucking weird job.
Yeah.
They fly all over the country and drive all over the country all the time to the farthest reaches of our godforsaken country in the hopes of finding like the 1 in 1,000, literally, of their visits where they're going to see something that makes them perk up.
And you really got to love baseball.
Oh my God.
Yeah. I have a neighbor who is a talent scout, and he is never home.
No,
like,
you can't.
Yeah, like maybe he's at his apartment like maybe 2 weeks out of the year.
It's sort of like being a flight attendant at that point.
Yeah, I mean, basically, and that's the thing, is that you always have to be grinding, always have to be on the lookout for new talent. I wish that's how the the entertainment industry worked. Could you imagine having like talent scouts for like major studios?
I'm going to Grand Rapids Civic Theater to find the next star.
If I have to see one more performance of Oklahoma, I'm going to burn this theater to the ground.
I mean, there are some talent. There are talent people who do go out and see high school shows and stuff. It's just they tend to be in big markets. But going back to baseball scouting, right?
Yeah.
You're right. Like you have to fucking love the game.
Yeah.
You have to bleed baseball. And
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest disservices that Moneyball does, both the book and the movie, is making these talent scouts out to look like a bunch of fucking boobs.
Yeah, or like at least trying to preserve an old dead corpse that has been dead for years,
Right.
which is the sport of baseball.
Right.
When clearly it's just kind of this one guy's like vendetta against baseball.
Because
and the
he himself
institutions.
couldn't make it in the
Yeah.
bigs.
Yeah.
It's this guy who has led this life of failure, being like, I gotta find something.
Right.
And I'm never gonna find it continuing to work for the Athletics. So we've got to change the Athletics. We've got to support the Athletic.
Yeah, and so he has this showdown with these scouts.
Athletic
That's right.
support.
Right, where he has flown in Jonah Hill to sit at the end of the table, and anytime he needs statistics, he like snaps and points at Jonah
Right.
Hill, which I think is supposed to be like very charming and does give like this like scene just a sense of like nice percussive element to
Yeah,
it.
again, it's Sorkin, right? It's,
Yeah, it's Sorkin. It's writing that bass line. But then the other thing too is like, don't snap at me.
Right.
Don't snap at your employees,
It's funny, I just
dude.
realized because Jonah Hill kind of plays this same role in Hail Caesar. He's the guy who does all the notary.
Oh, that's right.
The notarizing and
Yeah.
everything. It's like, yeah, he's just like functional and he's just saying, nope. See, the guy says it. The guy says it.
Brad Pitt is making unhinged choices in this scene too.
Oh, yeah, and they're good.
Yeah, they're really good. There's a point where he takes the top off a pen and fully like deep throats the pen
Yeah.
before ripping it off and then just spits the cap somewhere else. Like it's really fun character work in
It's
this
a fair
scene.
bit of spitting. You know, it's baseball.
Yeah, yeah.
Basically, where this takes us is to a showdown between Billy Beane and a guy named Grady. I don't remember his last name, but
Yeah,
this is a real guy.
Yeah.
This was the head of their scouting department. This is another thing that was massaged for dramatic heft. In
Yeah.
real life, Grady was actually pretty on board with Billy Beane's whole approach.
Yeah,
Sure.
but the guy who's playing Grady is a guy who also works in the MLB who is
Okay.
not a fan
He's
of,
an old school
of
guy.
Saber-metrics.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so
Cool,
this
cool.
is what then happens between the two of them.
This is about you and your shit, isn't it? 20 years ago, some scout got it wrong.
Whoa. Okay.
Now you're going to declare war on the whole
Okay.
system. You need to
Okay,
take down the whole
okay.
thing.
My turn. You don't have a crystal ball. You can't look at a kid and predict his future any more than I can. I've sat at those kitchen tables with you and listened to you tell those parents, when I know, I know. And when it comes to your son, I know. And you don't.
He's not going to fire this guy. He kind of makes this guy get into a position where
Right.
he can be fired.
Yeah, he lays his hand on him, and then Grady like throws his arm off, and it's like, okay, now you're fired.
Yeah.
It doesn't reflect well on old Billy Beane. I know we're supposed to be on his side, but there's something about this movie where it's like this guy, I don't know, you don't trust him fully. Even
Well,
though
he gets really dark in this scene too, and I was just thinking about like this baseball agent who might be a monster himself, but it's like being an amateur actor coming in and doing your first ever job where you're doing this sort of thing and having Brad Pitt lock in on you like
Yeah.
that must be just
He's
horrible.
He's so good.
Yeah,
this,
he's
this
great.
guy
Genuinely,
is
he
playing
holds his
opposite
weight.
Brad
Yeah.
Pitt. Like you sense equal but opposite sort of heft
Yeah.
from these two
Yeah.
guys.
And here's the thing. I have watched a lot of Sorkin stuff in my time, and there is a way that this scene is normally played. Right? We have usually Billy Beane standing up on the hill, right? Light shining behind him, taking this guy down. But Bennett Miller never lets that happen.
Right.
You sit in the morass and the muck of this fight between the two
And the
of them.
fucking buzzing fluorescent
And
green.
it just makes you feel bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And which I like.
I
And
really like
And I
it.
wish that there was more of this in the movie. I wish it wasn't always so dedicated to trying to get you back on Billy's side.
Right. It does try and stack the deck for him, but I think one of the successes of the movie is that it doesn't more often than it does, at least for me.
The other big piece of traditional scouting and player development is that it's how you get your best players. The thing about Saber-metrics, the thing about Moneyball is that, yes, you can absolutely assemble a winning team or at least a competent team using spare parts. However, what you're not going to get is the sort of long-term development of guys who come up in your farm system, become your stars, and you have the added like benefit of knowing that they are your guys, right? Again, for the Mets, we're talking guys like Jacob deGrom, Pete Alonso, David Wright, fucking Darryl Strawberry. These are the guys.
His head got real big.
Yes, it is a sentimental attachment, but it's not purely sentimental. It also comes down to these broader questions about working conditions, about like the relationship between employer and employee, between product and consumer. None of these things are addressed by Saber-metrics.
No, and in fact, when we see a couple of firings that happen here later on, you begin to see how that sort of lack of personal attachment has made its way into that as well. And that being a baseball player just mostly means accepting the fact that you're going to be moved around a lot and that your life can be uprooted at a moment's notice, which can't be good for the mental health of any of these fucking players.
And to be fair, some of that is just baseball and pro sports in general. But I do have an excerpt here from the book that I wanted to read about exactly that thing. And this is basically just talking about a last-minute trade that Billy made right before the deadline in the 2002 season. At that moment, Mike Magnanti was removing his Oakland uniform and Ricardo Rincon was removing his Cleveland one. Mags quickly left the Oakland clubhouse. He'd come back for his things later when no one was around. His wife had brought the kids to the game, so he couldn't just leave. Magnanti watched the game with his family until the 6th inning, and then left so that he wouldn't have to answer questions from the media. He had no desire to call further attention to his situation. In his youth, he might have mouthed off. He would certainly have borne a grudge, but he was no longer young. The numbness had long since set in. He thought of himself the way the market thought of him, as an asset to be bought and sold. He'd long ago forgotten whatever it was he was meant to feel.
Jesus Christ.
Regardless of whether you're doing Moneyball or you're doing more traditional wheeling dealing, this comes with the job when you're playing in the show.
I mean, it's also, there's a certain amount of it that comes with acting too, just the amount of rejection that you get. Eventually you just grow numb to it.
Or even like, getting a job and getting fired from it for, whatever reason.
Right, just being laid off.
Like I was.
Exactly. I meant for acting, but yes, also like layoffs and things like that. But like for acting, you can get individually fired for just kind of no reason. Like
like you just don't have the look that they're looking for. They like took a bet and like, oh, we fucked up and you're gone now. Or maybe just the director doesn't like you or whatever.
It's like, oh yeah, no, we wanted Stoltz to do Back to the Future. The directors don't want him. They're going to wait until Michael J. Fox is free from the sitcom, and then they're going to fire Stoltz like 2 weeks into the shoot.
The way that this all gets framed up in the movie is we see a scene where Billy is in his office with Peter, and Billy's like, okay, pretend that I'm a player.
Well, that's all you got to say? My kid just started a new school. They made friends.
That's, well, you shouldn't pull him out in the middle of the school year. You should wait.
What the hell are you talking about?
I don't know. I'm not going to do this. I think this is stupid. I'm not going to fire anybody, and this is dumb.
They're professional ball players. Just be straight with them. No fluff, just facts. Pete, I gotta let you go. Jack's office will handle the details.
That's it? Really?
Would you rather get a bullet to the head or 5 to the chest and bleed to death?
Are those my only two options?
Go on the road with the team.
You can really get a sense of all the weird sounds that are going on there. There's a little like bit of Foley that they add a little bit of reverb to, and then there's that sort of subway running by sound that comes up as they're getting deeper into this conversation about the bad feelings that come from, you know, the different ways you can die.
Yeah, the mix is taking full advantage of the entire dynamic range.
Yeah.
It's really something to hear. I mean, what you're hearing right now on this recording does not do justice to the original mix.
Yeah, and what you're hearing on Peacock does even less. Well, and it should be said, so that we do these cutaways where they're talking about the system, and you can hear like sports announcers and Bob Costas and whoever. I don't know if these are all stock or if they called people in to read these lines for the movie.
I don't know. I didn't look into it.
They do this bit where they're like explaining the Saber-metrics system. They're explaining Bill James. And they show these old like black and white pictures. They portray Bill James like he's Henry Darger or something. Like he's just some janitor somewhere coming up with some shit. And then they find all of his stuff when he dies. This guy's still around.
Yeah.
He's still alive. It's funny to go to the controversies section on Bill James, because one of the things that he has like infamously said was like, oh yeah, you could just fire all the players. They don't really matter any more than the people selling peanuts. Because you'll always find someone to fill it in.
I see.
And I feel like that's one of the ultimate expressions of what this whole Moneyball thing is.
That's taken to its logical conclusion.
And to be fair, Bill James is being a contrarian here. You know, he is exaggerating for for the point of for the point of emphasis. But like the book actually goes into a lot more detail about Bill James and his whole deal. What you really need to know is that he was the guy who one of the first guys who really truly realized that the way that stats were done was just not particularly sensical.
Yeah.
And realized that there was a need for a new way of doing stats. And so he actually started like his own little newsletter and
he tried to like get a column in newspapers,
but he couldn't.
And everyone was like, well, you just wrote a bunch of facts.
And so what he did instead was he started self-publishing, and he took out a column inch in the Sporting News back when, you know, it was still the Bible of baseball, and was like, hey, send me, you know, $10 and I'll send you my magazine.
Yeah. What he didn't realize at the time, maybe he still doesn't, I don't know, was that he was writing an almanac.
Yeah.
Right. He was not writing a column. Right. He was writing tables.
Well, but also the way that Moneyball is framed in this movie, and I think one thing that Sorkin does really, really well is he takes very big concepts and is able to deliver them very succinctly in like one sentence. He's good at pitching concepts to you.
I've watched The Big Short. I still don't really know what the fuck is happening there.
Right.
They tried really hard to explain it all. I get there's a lot of people standing at that poker table.
Yeah.
But here, even though I probably don't, I feel like I understand whatever they're trying to get at.
Well, exactly. And you get a line like, we are card counters at the blackjack table, and we are taking on the casino. And you immediately understand the stakes, and you immediately understand what like Moneyball is in relation to a traditional system.
A lot of what it means is foregoing the way that things were traditionally done, because what we discover about like how a roster is built under Saber-metrics is that rather than just having one player who replaces another player, what you do is you look at the productivity of one of your outgoing stars, and then you basically create a composite of that player using whatever other players are available at a decent price on the open market. And so when they lose Jason Giambi, rather than trying to get another star first baseman, they just replace him with three guys who they can platoon at first, who their combined output is going to be basically the same as his statistically, or at least close.
Right. And one of those guys is Chris Pratt.
That's right.
Yeah. Fresh. This is still Parks and Rec era Chris Pratt, right? This is not big movie star Chris Pratt.
This is Chris Pratt who has lost weight but not gained it.
That's right.
Yes.
Right? He has not gotten the bulk yet.
The player who he is portraying here is, again, a real guy, Scott Hatteberg, who, as we had mentioned before, started out as a catcher, basically threw his arm out, and so was no longer able to consistently throw back to the pitcher.
Yeah.
And so, along with a couple other players, Billy Beane brought him on board to play at first base. And One thing that the movie does here to kind of like raise the stakes and make you more invested in Hatterberg's whole deal is that they actually have Billy Beane go to his house in person to offer him. And they have this whole mostly fabricated thing of like Art Howe really, really not wanting to put Hatterberg on the lineup card, which is a bunch of bullshit, but I get why they did it for dramatic effect.
And Buffy Beane is like, hey, we've got to slay some vampires together. We've got to get you to get on the scene. He's like, I don't think I could ever play again. And it's like, no, you're gonna play again.
Right.
And this scene ends with like a weird little beat where it's like they walk out the door and it's like, well, me and the wife actress are here. We're gonna hug now.
Yeah, that was...
As opposed to like, I think what it should have done is cut back to a close-up of him just sort of looking at her completely frozen.
But he joins the team and he's bad. He's very bad at being a first baseman because of course he is. He's never played it.
And this is true. You know, his early on, he did not do well at first base.
Well, and the team really performed quite poorly.
Very poorly.
At the beginning of the season.
And so we see this. We see this dramatized, that their record is very poor. They're making a lot of bad plays, a lot of obvious errors. The way that the movie frames this up, it's that Billy Beane has this wonderful, brilliant plan, but Art Howe just isn't willing to go along with the plan.
I guess I do see that now. I was just sort of feeling like it's going to take a little while because they do still have to learn how to be a team or whatever.
And there's that too.
But it's portrayed so distantly that the Howe standing in the way makes more sense.
And the other thing too is that, you know, in the times that we see them in the clubhouse, there's one scene where Jeremy Jambi, Jason's brother, who they've also brought on board, is, you know, celebrating and dancing in the clubhouse after he fucking blew it during the game. And so then we get this big dramatic scene where, you know, Brad Pitt throws a water cooler or whatever. And now it's like, oh, he's in charge. And
and it's also like that's the moment where Brad Pitt finally becomes a coach. Like he becomes involved because his whole thing is like usual baseball superstition. He always leaves the stadium when the game is going.
Right.
He's never going to watch the game.
Which also true. This is just straight up accurate.
And that's normal superstition, but it's also part of like he's just not present. And after that point, when he gives them the what for, then he is present as someone that the players can actually talk to.
Right.
He also makes a concession and gets the vending machines to be free because these guys are like, we got to the clubhouse and like there's not just free soda. We have to pay a buck for the soda.
Yeah, and when Peter Brand is asked about this, he's just like, "Oh, well, that $1 is going towards the field," and it's just like, "What the fuck are you talking about?"
That was so good. That was very like I'm 22 and I don't know what to say. Like that felt so fucking real.
Yeah.
Well, and the other thing that we see about Billy Beane is that not only is he interacting with the players more, he's in the clubhouse all the time, which is not at all normal for a general manager, and in most situations would actually be considered a pretty serious breach of conduct.
Yeah, I actually got some weird vibes about him like telling players like what to do on the plate and shit.
Yeah.
I'm just like, this is not your job.
Yeah.
It's not. And this is a real thing as best as I can tell from having read the book and so forth. And I think that this is one thing too where there probably was a lot of very real friction between Billy and Art, because that is always the job, like the actual on-field product and what happens on the field on game day, that is traditionally the exclusive domain of the manager.
Oh my God.
The GM should not get involved with that shit.
No, I just realized that it's a conflict literally between art and commerce. It is. Son of a bitch.
Yeah.
Art versus Bean.
Counter. At this point now, as the movie has it set up, we have our core conflict, right? Will Billy's unique singular genius being this great man of history, you know, will he raise the Oakland Athletics and take them to the pennant, or will the machinations of traditional baseball, lazy ball players, and equally out of touch managers ruin his great plan?
It's less even will he take him to the pennant and more will they see one postseason game?
Well, yeah.
Will they at least make it to the wild card?
Right.
Yeah, and for a while it fails horrifically because Art just isn't taking this seriously.
Right.
He's not committing to the bit.
And Billy's not committing enough to the team, right? It's not enough just to do Moneyball. You still have to have the follow through on your golf swing.
And this to me felt really, really contrived. I'm curious if this was the case for you guys.
Just in the fact that they kept losing?
No, that's a matter of historical
Yeah,
record.
yeah.
I'm talking about the way that it was presented, where it was like,
because I don't think I knew enough to think of that contrivance.
And as an outsider, I kind of felt the same way. It was only after doing research for this episode that some of this stuff even struck me the wrong way. My first 2 times watching Moneyball, I'm like, hell yeah, dude, let's upset the fucking system. Let's take all this shit down.
What I did come across is that he's always encouraging the players to play conservatively.
Right.
If you're going to walk, right? Don't take a swing unless you know it's coming for you. I don't know. Coming for you? That's like a beanball? Like, no. Unless it's in the strike zone for sure, right?
This is going to be a Mr. Met, like, confronting you in a dark alley kind of thing. He's coming for you.
Absolutely. He's coming on you, maybe.
Hey, don't take any weird bets. Like, just no bunting, like hit as hard as you can, as safely as you can. And the big thing that he says is this is a war of attrition. There's no clock. Let the game come to you.
Well, there sure is now.
Because baseball got too long.
It did. So is this a decent time to talk about the way that Moneyball changed the game?
It's time.
Okay. So something that happened in baseball during the mid-2000s that continued all the way through to the pandemic, the beginning of the pandemic, was that baseball games just kept getting fucking longer.
What is this, cricket?
And there are
3 days?
And there are a number of reasons that this happened. Pitchers became even more powerful. The understanding that players are only going to like swing at a good ball made it a lot harder to fool them, like by going out of the zone or whatever.
Right.
And so the really all you could do to successfully get these guys out was to overpower them through pure force.
Right.
And so this led then to the emphasis on the like 96 to 101 mile an hour heater.
Sure.
The thing about the 101 mile an hour heater is that only a handful of people can do it.
Yeah.
And it destroys your elbow.
Oh, I can only imagine.
And in terms of the effect that it has on the actual game itself, you're either hitting home runs or you're whiffing entirely. And because there was no clock of any sort, the pitcher could take as long the fuck as he wanted to pitch the ball.
One single at bat becomes like the entirety of the good, the bad, and the ugly, basically. It's just people fucking staring each other down.
Yep.
Like this was already happening in the 2000s. This was already just like, I was really into some game and then I'd be like
come on, let's get on with it.
This 8th inning is just still going.
But it's forever.
But again, because this is Moneyball, like we have to look at the numbers.
Right.
And if you look at
this is good for the numbers.
If you look at the numbers of the time of game, it wasn't until the mid-2000s that the game time started to kind of get out of hand.
Yeah.
Interesting.
You can go watch those games from, the late 90s, early 2000s when the Yankees were winning everything.
Right.
You can go back and watch the 2000 World Series, which I do every once in a while, and I get really sad. And
Don't do this to
You weren't
yourself.
even a Mets fan.
I also watch the 86 World Series when I want to be happy. Leave me alone.
There you go, sure.
And
Why don't you watch a World Series where the Tigers win? In some far-off fantasy land.
Where the balls are made of pizza.
the
bats linguine.
The other big thing.
I'm very hungry.
I like that a fantasy land for you, like your Lewis Carroll world where anything is possible is just that everything is Italian food.
The other big thing that
Buca di Beppo
happened in the game of baseball. You lost Buca di Beppo?
Yeah, they're good. They went bankrupt.
Oh,
they went Buca di
you
bankrupt.
Poor boy.
I just admit, like your Emerald City is just the Pope room.
The Holy See, but it's made of pizza.
The Holy will see you now.
The other thing about the clock is that not only could the pitcher like step off, try to pick off whatever as many times as they wanted.
Oh, yeah.
As a batter, you could step out of the box whenever you wanted.
Yeah, there was a lot of just like
Calvin ball.
pacing back and forth, and it like this causes a different Moneyball thing to happen. A different stat changes, what we might refer to as an externality, which is people stop fucking watching.
That's right.
Because baseball already requires, it's already a long game, and there are a lot of games in a season.
162.
So many games.
Fucking season, and you do a playoff. Everything is a series.
Yep.
You're doing 5. You're doing 7.
Yep.
You're you're playing and playing and playing, And there's not an overall clock. It's innings.
Right.
You get to that bottom of the ninth. Or the 10th or the 13th or the 15th.
And if you love baseball, which I do, like the fact that there's 162 games is part of the appeal.
Yeah. Right. You get a lot of it.
You get a lot
content.
of it. You get like a large enough sample size to really start understanding statistically what is going on.
Sure.
You get hot streaks, you get cold streaks, you get to see new guys will just show up all of a sudden and they're amazing,
Sure.
But along with the problem of it being like too long, there was the problem of what was actually happening on the field was incredibly fucking boring.
Yeah.
Right.
Because not only was it you either hit a home run or you strike out, there's a third possibility, of course, which is that you hit the ball and it gets caught. And the thing about fly balls is that somewhere along the way, the statisticians realized that a pitcher actually has pretty much no control of what happens to a ball once it gets put in play. It's not like you can throw a ball in such a way where it's like, that was a really good curve, and so it's going to get to the fielder. That's not a thing.
Because it all matters when the bat collides with the ball. So it's the batter.
It matters where the fielder is placed. And so managers came up with something called the shift, which was something that was used sporadically in the game.
Okay.
But starting in the mid 2000s and then really accelerating in the 2010s, they just started positioning their fielders wherever. And so, you would get these really ridiculous situations where, let's say you have like a right-hander who is a real power hitter who's known for hitting home runs into the left deck or big, almost home runs, right? What you would do is you would basically move your right fielder to center. You'd move your center to left. You'd move your first baseman over to second base, and you'd put your second base at short.
And even your infielders.
And you'd throw your shortstop out in the middle of left field. Yes.
Oh my God.
This ruined the game.
Has this rule changed?
They banned the shift when they introduced the pitch clock.
Okay.
And these were two massive rule changes that brought back everything that people love about watching baseball. Because what's the most exciting thing about baseball? I mean, a home run, I guess. But like other than
attending
that,
the game in person, I think too.
Yeah.
That's real fun.
It's watching the bases fill up. It's this is why it makes for a good movie. This is why football also makes very easily for good movies, is because it's turn-based.
Exactly.
You have bursts of energy and strategy.
Yep.
Energy, strategy.
Yeah.
One moment that sticks with me was a broadcast from a Yankees game a couple years back, because I usually watch the national broadcast when they're on Fox.
Sure.
And I think it was Yankees Red Sox, and it was a hit out to right field. And Aaron Judge got to the ball. It was after it had dropped, right?
Yeah.
And so the runner was he'd cleared first. He was, moving towards second. Aaron Judge picks up the ball and throws a fucking dime straight to the second baseman, like he was in like catcher's mitt position with his glove. This perfect ball, like that's what makes baseball
I gotta
amazing.
say, even like for me, sometimes if you don't have access to like a TV channel that's showing it or whatever, and you're just watching the stat layout, and you just see each pitch as just like a dot in a square. Like that can be exciting. I remember watching that with the last game of the World Series in 2016, where the Cubs were, actually did it. Watching the first part of the game while I was trying to find a bar in Ridgewood that was showing it.
Sure.
I was like watching the feed there, and I was just like, oh my God. Are they going to do it? Are they going to fucking do it?
Yeah. Well, and we talk a lot on this show about like audio only formats, and listening to baseball is something I remember doing a lot as a kid.
Yeah.
There was a very famous San Diego radio announcer whose name escapes me now, but he would go, "Oh, doctor," every time it would like fly over the field.
I mean, you think about the teams that you grow up with, right? Or the teams that you listen to, and so much of the game and your experience of the game is defined by the voices that are calling it in a way that I don't think is the case for any other sport. So the pitch clock is exactly what it sounds like. And so from the moment that the pitcher gets the ball back from the catcher, he's got 20 seconds to get that ball off his hand if there is anybody on base. Or 15 seconds if there's nobody on base.
Interesting. Okay. Ooh, spicy.
So
it must really speed up the game.
Unbelievably so. And it makes it so much better. And the other thing is it means that pitchers can't overpower batters in the same way because they can't take 2 fucking minutes to figure their pitch out. Obviously, these are externalities that nobody could have predicted when this stuff was starting to happen.
Right.
But what I thought was so interesting about the back and forth about all these rule changes was that a whole bunch of people were like, well, you can't change the rules because it's baseball. And it's like, well, the whole point of the rules is to enforce a game that resembles the thing that you have known.
Right.
And baseball was becoming unrecognizable.
Yeah.
Where everyone in the infield and outfield is in one place.
Yes. It looked ridiculous.
So Billy goes out of his way to sort of bond with the players. There's a lot of really wonderful conversations he has with them one-on-one, basically to like kind of get them on board with Moneyball too. It's not just about getting Art on board. It's about getting the players also on board to like build that team. And we get this really wonderful interaction between him and Justice where there's a line where you can really feel, at least I really felt, the screenplay at war with itself, because David Justice says the line, I see how you talk to everyone else, but it's patter for effect. That shit ain't for me. And I mean, that is one screenwriter talking to Aaron Sorkin and saying, no thanks, not my jam. And it works, right? After all these losses, these continual losses, right? They make one final big trade push in a scene that I think is incredibly well paced, where it's just him, it's Billy Beane and it's Jonah Hill alone in an office together, and they're wheeling, they're dealing. It's pure Sorkin, but it's not taken at the speed. And I think this is like the one scene where that like really pays off. With, you know, this is the one where all the memes are from, where you see Jonah Hill like clenching his fist and going, "We got it." There's like a real palpable excitement. You're seeing like how the sausage gets made, and it's thrilling.
Yeah, and this is actually probably the most direct adaptation from the book, it's worth noting.
Interesting.
There is an extended scene, and it's in slightly different context in the book, where the author actually did sit in Billy's office and watch him work the phones.
And this is the final trade that like puts all the pieces in place, and then Moneyball starts working like gangbusters to the point that they're winning game after game after game.
But there's one thing that needs to happen as a result of all those roster moves, which is that Billy has to DFA a guy. He has to send him down, which if you don't have like an option or roster space means you basically have to cut the guy. And there is a conversation here where he talks to one of these players, and I clipped it because this is, I think, the movie trying to show you that Billy has developed an empathy that he didn't have before when he was teaching Peter how to, you know, let a guy go.
Mags. Hey, Billy.
I know I've been struggling lately, but, you know, second half of the season, definitely turned it around. Ricky and I have been working on some things on the bullpen.
I need you to stop getting dressed.
Traded?
I'm sorry for the crap news. I know it hurts.
Basic fucking empathy, Billy. Good on you for learning.
That's what Moneyball teaches you. Is how
empathy.
To be more empathetic.
Yeah.
And again, it's one of these things where it's like the script is fighting against itself here. Like, we're trying to get you on side with Billy as a guy, but to what end? It's also, the guy who he's talking to is not somebody who we've spent any real amount of time with. He's just a guy.
You just see that he has like braces on his legs, right?
Well, like, dental plan.
That he's using to like stretch out his
so like
muscle.
that's where all of the empathy is supposed to come from, is that you know that he's having some sort of physical struggle, and that's it. Because you get like close-ups of his knees every now and then.
What's interesting once you learn about the real guy is that you start to notice that so much of this movie is a lot of people coming up to Billy Beane and telling him what a great guy he is.
Yeah.
In a way that once you start noticing that in biopics in general, that it's a trope that screenwriters use to get you on the side of the guy. People be like, "You're such a great GM, Billy."
Well, it's either you're a great guy or I hate you because you're too great and we're bad.
This is also a recurring trope in Aaron Sorkin's work. It's the fucking Jeff Daniels in the newsroom, people walking up to him and just being mad because he's so damn good at the news, you know?
He's the best at the news.
You're just such a principled Republican.
Yeah. I mean, as is Aaron.
I mean,
he wanted him nominated.
Mitt
Romney, for
they
God's
should have
sake.
fucking nominated. What a big swing and a miss by the Biden campaign, not getting Mitt Romney in there.
Back on
Am
the
I right,
fucking
folks?
ticker.
God.
Oh,
For diversity, we need to get a Mormon in the White House. It just needs to be done.
So once we
Who
get
are these Romneys coming down?
Oh no!
Reparations for Nauvoo.
Saturday's Romney. So once the clubhouse is cleared and all the pieces are in place, God, the A's start winning, and they start on this infamous streak, which I did not know about, and not knowing about the streak watching this movie makes this next section pretty harrowing in a way that I think if you, and even actually, honestly, even now watching it for my third time, or maybe it's my 8th time, I like this movie. There's a point where like I'm always fooled because I never remember what happens at the end of this September 2nd game.
They get through like a month and they're like 17-4, and it's like everything's like looking pretty damn good.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden we find ourselves in world record territory.
And this is insane. I mean, it just even now, like I don't believe that this streak has been beaten.
Right.
It has.
Oh, it has?
It was by the Cleveland Guardians.
Okay.
Or they might have still been the
2017.
Indians in 17.
They were the Indians at that point.
The overall MLB record is from the 1910s, and I think it's the Giants.
Okay.
And they had a 26-game streak, whatever the overall record is. But of course, for this league, 20 was the number to get to.
And so this is, I think, where the movie sings the best, because it is very difficult to do this well, where you are combining archival footage with stuff that you shot.
Yeah, and primarily we don't see the actors play. We
Right.
see the stock footage for the most part until we get to this section, and then we actually are watching them play a game.
And of course, what helps here is that the actors playing these ball players are, in fact, other than Chris Pratt, ball players themselves.
Yeah.
Right. And
he just plays with his balls.
So this whole sequence happens because Billy Beane is driving away from the stadium because, you know, very superstitious. He wants nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
It is the day where they would break the record. He won't go back, but he gets a call from his wife and daughter saying, you have to go. His daughter's like, you have to go watch the game.
And
you
again,
have to go.
This is just one of those things where like, okay, yeah.
Well, was that in the book? I'm curious. It's
No.
like to call him back to the game.
No, they made this up.
I mean, sure, it might be kind of a contrivance.
we
but
made it up.
It's a complete fabrication.
But it's so quick, and it like the thing that it sets up is so great. You know, I'm fully on board at this point. So he turns around, he does a whole like U-turn in traffic, probably killing several people, and he goes back to the stadium and he walks in and he's like watching the game, and you see that Pete is also in the audience watching the game, and he looks and he sees that Billy's watching the game, and it's like, oh, he's like finally like embracing the sport or whatever,
Right.
and then they make an error.
Well, because he doesn't want to jinx it, but then he finds out at the 4th inning that they're already up 11-0.
Right.
So he's like,
Right.
I can't possibly jinx it. I'm going back to the stadium. But
And-
as baseball player Yogi Berra said famously, it ain't over till it's over.
It sure ain't.
Yep.
And
He also said, give me my picnic basket.
Different guy.
but Michael Lewis, the author of the book, was there for this game.
Oh, shit. Okay.
And
cool.
Billy Beane was too. And in reality, Billy was getting excited. And then he did go in there and start watching and then like freak the fuck out and go to the weight room. That happened.
Yeah. And you can tell that Billy Beane has anxiety throughout the movie. I think Pitt like underplays it, but like the man is almost like on the constant verge of a panic attack. This is like the panic attack scene, right? That he himself has somehow caused this cosmically to like blow this game. So all of a sudden Kansas City starts winning. Like they start scoring back to back to back to back, and they end up tying the game
In the top of the ninth.
And the way that this builds over the course of it is so anxiety inducing.
Well, what they're kind of trying to do here narratively, I think, is, they're trying to connect Billy's anxieties and insecurities about his own game, like literally like his ability to play ball. With the future of the A's as a franchise.
Right.
It's making the implicit explicit at this point. I think the thematic idea of, well, he's just here and feeling this way because of his own personal insecurities, I'm not sure how well it hangs, but I'm curious what you guys think.
I'm just not even thinking on that level in this because I'm just so invested in the win.
Yeah, me too.
Like,
that is how I feel.
Are they going to hit 20? There's also a great moment in the montage of victories where they match the record that was set by the A's back in Philadelphia 100 years earlier.
Yeah, and you get to see photos of them back in Philly.
Was really cool.
And it's really lovely.
So connecting back to that part of history was cool.
Yeah.
And then zooming right past it to just get to them almost fucking completely blowing it.
Yeah, like getting so fucking close.
And as as someone who was a Cubs fan growing up, it was like, oh, I've been here.
And who makes the call that ultimately saves the game? It's art. It's Philip Seymour Hoffman makes the call, which again sort of disproves the movie's whole point, doesn't it?
The game is tied, and that means that if Hatterberg scores a run, the game's over. The A's win.
Yeah. And so he goes up to bat. We see him miss a couple and it builds the tension that way. And then right when all hope seems lost, we just hear the sound of the bat hitting the ball, and you see Brad Pitt having a panic attack in the dark, like fully swoop his head up like in a move that like literally made my heart go, huh, like it makes you briefly leave your body, and you get to see him run the bases.
Yeah, because his reaction to it is supernatural because he's in the weight room.
Right.
Yeah, and I guess he's watching it on TV, but you don't typically hear the bat hear the ball on TV.
Whack. Yeah.
Right. And so it's like it's shattered reality itself.
Yeah.
And you're expecting like the flugelhorns and the synthesizer to come in and to see the light, turn into fireworks.
Yeah. A full natural moment. But the best
big
part
natural
of this, get out of here.
That's what I call it when I'm fucking Mrs. Met. Get out of here.
The best part about this for me, and it's so small and it's so subtle, and it's something that only Philip Seymour Hoffman can do, is you see Philip Seymour Hoffman see the hit happen, and you see him realize in real time what's happened.
Yeah.
The surprise happens in real time.
Yeah.
And that is so hard to do as an actor, to act surprised and elated, and you see him fully lose his shit.
And especially when you're not actually looking at anything at all.
At all.
At
all. It is a profound moment, and that's always the moment in the movie that makes me cry, because there's the metatextual thing of just having lost him, but it is also just like the joy of this like stick in the mud, like fully coming alive.
Something that I think makes Hatterberg's home run even cooler, which is touched on in the book, but they couldn't find a way to put it in the movie.
Sure.
Is that Hatterberg was not even scheduled to play at all. He was like,
what?
He was just in the clubhouse. He'd had 4 cups of coffee because he just didn't think he was going to have to go in.
Yeah.
Oh,
he was pulled in at the last minute, and the bat that he used was a bat that somebody had given him.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, there was this tree in his backyard, and it got struck by lightning. His dad was buried under it. And
Yeah.
So he was able to
watch the natural.
No, it was like some like maker of bespoke baseball bats who was like, "Hey man, check this shit out. You want one of these?"
Yeah, we call it the Wonder Boy.
And so it was like that makes it even more magical that it was just some,
But it does kind of play against one. It's less simple.
Yeah.
And it plays against the thesis of the Moneyball.
True.
Because the Moneyball got him hired, but it was the actual game about people and about all of our our guys who want things to be by the book.
Right.
Those are the guys who actually make this decision and say, you know what, I'm thinking about the people. We're getting you out there.
Because
and it changes everything.
That's also just the magic of baseball.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's hard not to be romantic about it.
My favorite part of this game is in the 8th inning, once they get tied for 11th and they're heading back into the dugout, they do one of those like your ears are ringing type thing where everything gets muted while a guy kind of rages and he throws his bat against the wall.
Yeah.
But they mute it right on the ass slap. He's walking into the dugout.
This is like the most bespoke sports movie moment in this anti-sports movie, right?
Yes.
It is the victory.
Yeah,
It is
we're
the
actually
triumph.
watching a baseball movie here.
We're watching a baseball movie, and then the movie reminds you what it is, because then we go to like their big playoff game,
right?
And they immediately lose.
Yeah, they lost to the Twins.
And then you just see that 12-year-old kid going, "Fuck you, man! We won the game."
I think what's interesting here too is that they put in a clip from somewhere, and I don't know where it's from, but it's some sports commentator being like, you can try with all these bits and pieces, but you can't fundamentally reinvent the game of baseball. It's just not gonna work. And the thing is, I think he's right.
Yeah.
But the movie wants you to think that he's wrong.
Because at the time, I think the movie thought he was wrong too. Right? Because Moneyball did change the game for a while. Like, this is, again, us in 2024 now kind of moving past Moneyball, or at least the sport seems to have moved past the idea of Moneyball.
I guess pure Saber-metrics, but it's much more driven in that way.
Yeah,
still,
it's like,
Right.
to think about like just the number of people involved in the Saber-metrics scene that have been whose public perception of them has changed, like Nate Silver. It's like, I'm going to bring saber-metrics over to elections.
No, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
And then it's like, people are like, no, we're just kind of sick of your shit. And it's like, yeah, okay, you're technically right because you're talking about probabilities. What the fuck does that actually matter in the end of the day?
And that's sort of part of the thing, too, is that in the book talks about this a bit. In a playoff environment, it's no longer 162 games.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Everything starts over again. You've just got the best of 7. Like a World Series is 7 games.
Yeah.
And things are far more likely to get statistically fluky in a 7-game series. And that's what makes it great.
Right, right. If you're going to see your hometown team go up against the Yankees, you could see them lose 4 times in a row and the game is over.
And this is the unique magic of the game and any game.
Right.
Where those things that we were talking about earlier, right? The squeeze bunt, a pitcher, intentionally walking a guy, the unexpected steal, things like that.
Yeah.
They are moments that are very, very risky plays. And that's why you try not to make them too much over the course of a regular 162 game season. But
sure.
In the playoffs, it's those little moments, it's those little decisions that can change the course of the entire series. In this game, this movie just doesn't understand it. It makes me so mad.
So anyway, the season is over, and then we get like an explain it all monologue from the Boston Red Sox guy who wants to buy Douglas Carter Bean here.
Yeah.
And he like this was such a low point of the movie because it's just like spelling out what the whole movie's been trying to say the whole time, which is like, you got people who are set in their ways and you want to tell them new things and they're gonna say no, and it's like, we've had 2 hours of this already. At least this wasn't the end because it was trying to make a point past that, but
and so it was just reiterating it, like really spelling it out for the people at the back of the house. But the cool thing about this segment is we do get to go through Fenway Park and just see how different it is from the A's like whole deal, what happens when there is money behind it, and it's really cool. Like it really makes you really want to go to Boston and go see a Red Sox game, doesn't it? It really puts that flavor in your mouth.
No, not really.
Oh, really? Okay. I think it looks pretty cool.
It's
and
cool.
I'm not
you really
a
want to
baseball
see
guy.
a Red Sox game in Boston?
No.
So I grabbed 2 clips here, sort of from this ending-ish part. The first clip is Billy talking to Peter. And I think that this is sort of his thesis statement, I guess, as a character, like what this means for him.
If we don't win the last game of the series, they'll dismiss us.
Billy.
I know these guys, I know the way they think, and they will erase us. And everything we've done here, none of it'll matter. Any other team wins the World Series, good for them. They're drinking champagne, they get a ring. But if we win, on our budget with this team, we'll change the game. And that's what I want. I want it to mean something.
You got a 20-game streak, and I'm just like, as a non-baseball guy, I'm just like, that's really impressive. And it should mean something, and then immediately we get it's like no, fuck this.
This is true. This is actually just straight up true.
Yeah.
This movie has sort of a 2-piece thesis statement, right?
Pieces.
That's right, Brian. The first piece is about like what baseball and doing all this meant to Billy Beane, right? How this is the conclusion of his arc. But the whole reason he goes to Boston is because he has the opportunity to manage the fucking Red Sox. Right. And so now we learn like what he is doing for baseball in a broader context from the owner of the Red Sox.
For $41 million, you built a playoff team. You lost Damon, Giambi, Isringhausen, Pena, and you won more games without them than you did with them. You won the exact same number of games that the Yankees won, but the Yankees spent $1.4 million per win, and you paid $260,000. I know you're taking it in the teeth out there, but the first guy through the wall, he always gets bloody. Always. This is threatening, not just a way of doing business, but in their minds it's threatening the game. But really what it's threatening is their livelihood. It's threatening their jobs. It's threatening the way that they do things. And every time that happens, whether it's a government or a way of doing business or whatever it is,
we get it, right?
Like holding the reins.
Yeah.
Their hands on the switch.
You know what's so funny about this? What this sounds like to me?
Crazy.
This sounds like somebody pitching Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Anybody who's not tearing their team down right now and rebuilding it using your model They're dinosaurs. And we sitting on their ass on the sofa in October watching the Boston Red Sox win the World Series.
What's this?
I want you to be my general manager. That's my offer.
Yeah. This is what I come away from this movie remembering, is this idea of like, wow, the game has been changed forever. How cool is this guy? But you're exactly right, AJ, that it's like, well, how do we fight the problem of, capital and the problem of, over extraction, over speculation? We just do more of it.
Yeah, we build a separate capital system to fight the first capital system.
A bigger, more efficient market to combat the existing inefficient market. This is a fundamentally, I think, we talk sometimes about like works of art that are inherently conservative in their outlook. I think this is one of them.
I agree. And it is also, the question was posed, what is a piece of conservative art that you like? And this is one of those pieces of conservative art that I like. Because after this, we go back to the A's, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Bean turns this down. He does not go to Bean Town.
No, he sure does not.
And
his town. You'd think he'd go.
What's really remarkable too is that, like, again, going to the book, the deal was like pretty much done. Like the movie does not do justice to just how abrupt Billy's decision was to pull out of the Boston deal. It was as good as his.
Yeah, and he has a conversation with Pete. It's the final Billy and Pete scene where Pete takes him into a back room. He's like, I want to show you something. And he shows him this clip about this batter who hits a ball and it starts running the bases, and he never really goes past first. He always just goes and he lands on first and he's safe about it. But this time he decides to keep running. But when he does, he trips all over himself and like clambers back to the base to put his hand on it. Right. But everyone is laughing at him, and the first, thought is like, oh, because he fell over, right? But it's like, no, it's because the ball went over the fence. He's made a home run,
right?
And it was so silly for him to be clamoring for it. And it's the idea being that the people who change the world don't ever know they've done it because they're too focused on their own foibles and their own lives to see the bigger picture. And I do like that this whole thing is presented. And then Pete's like, it's a metaphor. Do you understand that it's a metaphor? And he's like, yes, I understand that it's a metaphor. And
unusually self-aware writing there.
Which I also think is the benefit of having Aaron co-write with somebody, is that there's somebody who can point and say, this is very self-aware.
I want to say about Jonah Hill's character, Paul de Podesta, the real guy, later was able to exercise his success as a Saber-metrics fellow, as a guy who really thinks about numbers in terms of business in a different way, by getting on the board for Sears Holdings. And then 1 year later, there was no more Sears.
Oh no!
Because he wasn't the one responsible for that. That was the CEO, but it was still like this idea of, we're going to rethink the way business is done by turning a company against itself, and that'll make more money somehow.
I think that this movie is sort of endlessly rewatchable. It is the kind of movie that would thrive on TNT if anybody still watched TNT. It is a weirdly comforting movie for me, just because it is, I don't know, there's something about the soundscape that just really appeals to me. It's something that I'm going to watch forever, even though I don't necessarily even agree with it entirely. It's just, I think the performances are captivating, and I think it's a really good movie.
It's interesting because I think I had exactly the opposite reaction. Like, even though technically, in terms of performances, all of that stuff, very impressive, very good to go back to this movie.
Yeah.
Taking the narrative that they presented and then comparing it to the reality of what this did to baseball.
Yeah.
For me personally, as someone who loves baseball, it was just too much of a disjunct for me to be able to get over it.
Right.
And I think that as time continues to pass, this movie is going to feel more and more anachronistic, even with all of the incredibly good performances and solid construction. Maybe that's just me. I don't know. But
well, I think that games are for children, and movies should be about adult things like paying for your car insurance and sucking dick.
Okay. Well, folks, if you want to help us suck dick and make our car insurance payments, I have a deal for you. If you go to patreon.com/worstofall and give us $5 a month, it'll get you access to our premium episodes, which we put out every other week. and access to Fancy Movie Time with Brian and AJ, where they talk about fancy movies. Also for $10, you'll get access to Lads Cast, where we just kind of shoot the shit every month about what's on our mind. And in general, just thank you so much for listening to our show. It's because of your listenership, whether you subscribe to the Patreon or not. You help us keep doing this shit, and we appreciate all of you greatly.
So there is a Richard Greenberg play called Take Me Out, which I want to start off here by saying is not very good.
It's about what if Derek Jeter was gay?
Yeah, and then killed. Spoilers for Take Me Out. But there is one compelling element of that play to me, and that is the arc of the character of Mason Marzak, who in the original production was played by Dennis O'Hare. And it is the accountant for the fake baseball team within the world who...
Definitely not the Yankees.
Definitely not the Yankees. The Empires, I think they are in the show.
Confederates.
Oh, no! But it's basically him slowly falling in love with baseball. And the first monologue that we get from him is one about how he started studying the playback tapes of the old baseball games, and he started studying the numbers of baseball games. And that is how he fell in love with it. He saw how perfect everything fell into like multiples of 3, how like the batting averages could determine a whole season. He lost himself in the spreadsheets. But by the end of the play, he figures out that the actual thing that he wants is the connection to the players themselves. And if Moneyball has a failing, it's that it just never fully reckons with that. So what I hope for the future of baseball and for movies about baseball is they focus a little less on the numbers and more on the players.
I hope that I get to plow Mrs. Met.
I'm the worst of all possible AJs.
I'm the worst of all possible Brians.
And I'm the worst of all possible Joshes. See you next week.